Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
Well, you look at what's going on in California. I mean, I don't say that people are racist, but there's quite sure some racist suspects up there. All them houses getting burned down, all right? But when they're interviewed, a lot of them say, oh, yeah, it is tragic and all like that, but really ain't no big deal. We'll build back up. I always hear that, year after year, anytime. Mudslides, all of that. Yeah, well, the house is gone, but we'll build it up again. We're all here. See, so things, they don't care nothing about no things. And they definitely don't care nothing about people. Primarily black people.
On Hawaii's Big Island, the Kilauea volcano is wreaking havoc on streets and homes, and emissions from the volcano have triggered a condition red alert because of potentially lethal air quality. About 2,000 people have been evacuated, 26 homes have been lost. One of them belonged to retired schoolteacher Monica Devlin, who is on the line now from Pahoa, Hawaii, where she's staying with a friend. Hi there, Ms. Devlin.
Aloha.
Aloha. I am sorry to start here, but I wonder if I could ask you to take us back to the day that you had to leave your home.
That was Thursday, May 3rd, and it's very vivid in my memory.
I imagine it is. I'm told that by that afternoon you could feel the heat even though you were inside.
Yes, it was amazing. Around 3:30 or so in the afternoon, friends came driving up in their pickup and said, "Come, look," and they take me to my back of my house, and there was the first fissure a couple of streets away. And unbeknownst to me, the heat that I was feeling, I now recognize it must have been lava flowing directly under my house.
And as the afternoon wore on and evening came, what was it that made you think, okay, it's time to get out of here?
Well, I went through the Kalapana flow back in 1990, and we had days and days of being on 72-hour evacuation alert. But this was so unusual. It was a sudden crisis. I turn on the 5:30 news, and there's an immediate evacuation notice that we must get out. My 2 dogs are my family. So my immediate response was get the dog crate, get the 30-pound dog food I had just bought, thinking I'll be back in the morning for my 1-year-old iMac computer and my 1-year-old John Deere lawn tractor and, all those belongings that are so unnecessary when safety is the prime focus.
You always wonder what you would take if you had to run in a hurry, and I'm sure you never thought it would be the 30-pound bag of dog food.
Yeah, your priorities become very clear. The house is gone, and now a magnificent 12-foot-high wall of lava is where my house once stood.
I'm so sorry. May I ask, did you have insurance?
Very gratefully, I do have insurance. And in 40 years of yoga, And trying to learn to be centered, I think, has finally worked.
Yeah, I bet you're drawing on that yoga now.
Oh, indeed.
Was this something that was always in the back of your mind as a possibility, living where you do, or as you have for years?
Yes, here the lava goddess is Madame Pele, and you're very clear from the moment you step foot on the island that this is a volcanic creation.
Well, what's next? Have you even allowed yourself to try to think about whether you might rebuild or what you'll do?
I will probably move back to be close to my daughter. She's in Sonoma County, which is where they had the terrible fires. Their home was saved, but she knows what this is like to some degree.
Well, Monica Devlin, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll be rooting for you as you figure out what the next step is.
Thank you for your interest and time.
That's Monica Devlin speaking to us from Pahoa, Hawaii.
Poor people, King's real last dream. When we mention Martin Luther King's name today, the image arises of his I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C., which has been replayed by media more than any other. By the time of his assassination, he had moved quite a way past that speech, condemning U.S. militarism, racism, capitalism, and poverty. His uncompleted work was his call for a poor people's campaign designed to appeal to all of the impoverished across America, Black, white, Latino, Native American, and Asian. King, by embracing poor people, had grown beyond a black leader and beyond civil rights to the ideals advocated by Malcolm X, human rights. Among the demands of the campaign, a guaranteed income for all. King's assassination on April 4th, 1968, took the most gifted activists off the board, and with it, much of the energy behind the campaign. Until now. Today, 50 years after King's assassination, activists have emerged to rekindle his dream of a poor people's campaign. Across America, local and national voices are organizing, trying to bring King's dream to life. Activist scholars Reverend William Barber and Dr. Liz Theoharris are calling for a poor people's campaign for this new century. The Poor People's Campaign and the Institute for Policy Studies have just produced a new report called The Souls of Poor Folk, inspired by the classic work by W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk. The report links impoverishment, systemic racism, attacks on voting rights, attacks on the environment itself, and the war economy to reveal America's war on the poor. Reverends Barber and Theoharris call for 40 days of protests to put teeth into the campaign, one that calls for nonviolent actions all across the nation. They're calling for nothing less than the resurgence of mass movements to challenge what King opposed in his last year of life: poverty, systemic racism, rampant militarism, and capitalism and its effects on global climate systems. King would be proud. For more information, contact Pennsylvania & poorpeoplescampaign.org. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
Curly hair is beautiful, and that may not sound like an especially revolutionary or bold statement, but it is for many women in Egypt. That's because they've been told all their lives to straighten their naturally curly hair. By perfect strangers sometimes. But that societal stigma against curly hair seems to be easing up now. My BBC colleague Dina Abu Ghazala has been writing about that. So, Dina, you wrote a story recently that basically is stating that curly hair is making a comeback in Egypt. I want to find out more about that, but tell us about the stigma first. Why have Egyptian women been pressured for so long to straighten their hair?
Well, I don't know why historically this happened, but I can tell you that at least since I became conscious of my existence as a woman being raised in Egypt, I grew up to know that being beautiful, meaning having straight hair, and blonde even, if that would be better. So almost everything that we Egyptian women do not have, because Egypt, after all, lies in Africa, and having this sort of dark skin, curly hair is the dominant feature, really. So as a girl living in Egypt, everything that I saw in front of me sent this message that being beautiful means having straight hair. So I would turn on the TV and see the commercials. They are all selling products for straight hair. You would see even the models used for these commercials having straight hair. Soap operas or movies, all the actresses, celebrities have straight hair. Whenever there is a big event, if we have a wedding in the family, or it's just even a party, it's a no-brainer for my parents and me to take me to the hairdresser to straighten my hair.
Does it extend to the workplace? I mean, it's not just a family thing, but do you find kind of pressure in an office?
Yeah, well, one of the girls I interviewed actually reached the point where she decided to leave the country because of this kind of pressure. She tells me that for the first couple of months of her working in an Egyptian bank, someone from HR would come to her and ask her to straighten her hair because her appearance is inappropriate.
Wow. And she left Egypt because the pressure got too much?
Yes, I know it does sound extreme. I think for every one of us, we're different. We react to things differently, and each and every one of us has a different breaking point. For her, this was a breaking point. She has this big, thick hair, very curly hair. And every time she goes out of the house, she walks in the streets, someone, some way or another, has to comment on her hair. And she reached the point when she was so fed up and she couldn't take this anymore. And then she traveled to Spain. And for the first time of her life, she walked in the streets and no one commented on her hair.
Wow.
For the first time, she didn't have to prepare herself for the comments she will hear. And if she ever heard comments there in Spain, they were actually positive comments.
But as you've been writing, it sounds like things are changing in Egypt.
Exactly. It all started with the creation of a Facebook group called The Hair Addict. So the one who launched the group was actually mocked for her hair as a child, and also went through this phase of having to straighten her hair constantly. So she said that while doing this, while straightening her hair, she started, researching about how to be able to protect her hair from the side effects or the damage that will happen as a result of this constant heating. And over the years, she accumulated this wealth of knowledge, and she decided, I can actually share this knowledge with other people. So she launched this group.
Wow.
And this group started growing, until now it has more than 105,000 female members.
Are you a member?
Group. Yes, I am, indeed.
What kind of things do people post on the Facebook group?
Simple tips, like, for example, and I know this sounds completely trivial, but my biggest problem, for example, was how to keep my curls while sleeping. So I would have a very nice, I would take a shower and have a very nice curly hair, and then go to sleep and wake up with my hair completely looking different.
Well, I would guess that after a life of being told you need straight hair and trying to straighten your hair, suddenly having your natural curly hair is almost a new thing.
Yeah. And tips like this, simple tips. But I have to say what really set this trend and made it a pattern is the heat-free challenge. Because they said, okay, we keep sharing all these tips and natural remedies, whatever, but then women would go to the hairdresser and straighten their hair, and then again it gets damaged. So we keep moving in a vicious circle. So in order to stop this, we really need to embrace our natural hair. That's it. Do not straighten it. And then they started posting pictures of themselves, like day 1 heat-free, day 100 heat-free, going all natural, and the difference. And people started, pictures are a very powerful tool. So people started seeing the pictures and saying, oh, this actually is possible. We can do this.
Big changes. So is this a case of women just having had enough and forcing a change, or are Egyptian men also getting on board with this?
No, I'd say this is a movement led by women.
Right.
The reaction from men it differs. The biggest, I would say, negative reaction would come from the older people. I think this is a big change for the older generation. So some people would tell me, especially mothers who have children, tell that their mothers, the grandparents of these children, would tell them, "Why don't you just, brush her hair properly? Why are you leaving it like that?" They're not used to the idea of like her hair is curly, you leave it curly.
I'm guessing there's no turning back with this now. It's not like there's going to be, more straight hair, kind of challenging the rebirth of curly hair.
Yeah, I think exactly. Women started something, and the way I see it is that it's not just about curly hair. It's about your choice. You do whatever you want to do. I think the message is there is no one way. I mean, you can be whatever you want to be, but the point is that you want to be. So I think this is the point, just liberating you from everything that anyone tells you. We're giving you the information. You make decisions for yourself. You decide either, yes, I want to go down that route and take care of my hair naturally, or guess what? Yes, I know this, but I like how I look with my straightened hair. Go ahead and do it. It's your choice.
I think of the famous Egyptian soccer star Mohamed Salah, who has curly hair, but I'm guessing Egyptian men don't face the same pressures.
Definitely. As a man, it's fine. The pressure to look in a certain way is, of course, you cannot compare it. There's no comparison between the pressure on women and the pressure on men.
The BBC's Dina Abu Ghazala telling us about the curly hair comeback happening in Egypt. Thank you, Dina.
You're welcome.
Tonight, 2 frat brothers from Sigma Alpha Epsilon have been expelled from the University of Oklahoma after leading a chant that they'd rather black people be lynched than join their fraternity.
We're going to take a look now at a problem that has marred campus life for some time: racist incidents and sexual harassment involving fraternities. California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo has been racked by allegations of this kind of behavior. The state's Attorney General's office is now investigating photos of white students in blackface that spread on social media. Cal Poly's administration has temporarily suspended all Greek organizations. Matthew Huey, a sociologist at the University of Connecticut, sees the roots of such behavior in the very origins of fraternity life.
We have the American higher educational system, which was designed to educate white, male, propertied elite students. As more and more students started to come into university and the university started to become a little less elite, Greek letter organizations were formed. And they were formed as a way for those very elite propertied white male students to create even more exclusionary spaces within college and university life. So they became vehicles in a way for the reproduction of inequality. It was very much working in elite interests. That's what it was designed to do. That's how it functioned.
Leilani Hemmings-Palais also believes a predominantly white, affluent student body and administration have historically enabled inappropriate behavior. She's a sophomore majoring in ethnic studies at Cal Poly and says that as a student of color, she's felt unwelcome and isolated since she got to campus. She's a student activist who helped organize protests against blackface and other racially charged incidents involving members of the Lambda Chi Alpha and Sigma Nu fraternities. Hemmings-Palais says she's experienced hostility from members because of her activism.
Students that are in fraternities and things like that often will wear their letters and wear them very proudly. And when they do come to these protests and are jeering at us and saying, oh, well, why are you protesting? It is definitely still a problem within Greek life that there are oftentimes white students, particularly white students from wealthy backgrounds, that give pushback when people are trying to make the campus a community for people other than white rich folks.
Was there a moment when you felt really threatened on campus?
There was a protest that was going on regarding the blackface incident, and I had a megaphone because I was one of the organizers for it, and I had a student walk up to me. He's a tall white male that walked up to me and yelled the N-word in my face and then continued walking as if nothing had happened.
Were you surprised when that happened? Were you shocked the moment that it happened?
I was. I mean, I know that a lot of the work that I do here on campus puts a target on me, but generally speaking, they'll put flyers up that are very racist or very misogynistic or homophobic, and they'll do it at night or they'll do it when no one is there. And so having someone run up to me and say that to me, I was not necessarily surprised, but I was shocked that it happened then and that this person had the audacity to say that.
But what would you say, Leilani, to those who argue that however offensive, however vulgar the language, that they have a right to express themselves? It's a matter of free speech. What's your reaction to that argument?
In a lot of these conversations with free speech, I feel like it's coming from a place that ignores the implications of hate speech coming from someone with a privileged identity, you know? And so in these free speech arguments, I think we really have to problematize, one, who and what for the First Amendment and things like that were written for, you know? And when you use your free speech, which, okay, fine, if it is a right then, and you want to use it freely, then you have to understand that there are systems and institutions in place that will allow people who are in a privileged group to use their free speech and to go off without any punishment, while the person that's the target of their hate speech is going to have to deal with all of the trauma that comes from that on their own personal level, but also with all of the history that brings up. So I'm very hesitant to really just let people get off without any consequences when they use their free speech to be violent against people.
That's Leilani Hemmings-Pauli, a sophomore at Cal Poly. When we reached out to Cal Poly for comment, they told us diversity on campus and keeping students safe are priority issues for them. Across the country in the state of New York, we turn to Syracuse University, this host's alma mater, which is accused of being too harsh on fraternity members. A group of Theta Tau pledges were seen on tape making explosive remarks about blacks, Jews, Latinos, women, gays, and people with developmental disabilities. The video also contains the depiction of a sexual assault. The pledges were apparently staging sketches in a vulgarity-laden roast at a party. Video of the whole thing went viral. It spawned angry demonstrations. Syracuse University has now expelled Theta Tau. It says such behavior has no place in the Syracuse University community. The administration is considering how severely to punish those students who were involved. That could mean suspension or expulsion on the grounds of violating the university's sexual harassment and discrimination policy. Law professor Greg Germain is advising some of the students who now face disciplinary action. He argues that university administrators are denying them due process.
They've got this one sentence that constitutes the basis for their claim, and it says, this complaint arises from events on March 30, 2018 at the Theta Tau fraternity house, wherein it is alleged that you participated in the creation, direction, depiction, filming, or dissemination of a production depicting sexually explicit activity demeaning to women, physically and developmentally disabled, and racial and ethnic groups. That's all it says. Now, think about what that means. That means anybody participating in a play that depicts, that does not actually contain sexually explicit activity demeaning to anyone else, would be guilty of violating the Code of Student Conduct. I can't imagine a broader statement of a violation of basic free speech principles than that.
Professor Germain explains why.
The students were doing a roast. The idea of the roast was that they had a conservative member of the fraternity who was being roasted, and they portrayed him as an extreme right-wing racist. And so that was the idea of the skit. It wasn't they were expressing their own racist views. They were critiquing racist views.
If a university's intent is to provide a safe environment for all students equally. Should a university have the right to say, we don't want this type of student here who engages in this kind of behavior that historically has been seen as a means of keeping minority groups down, of controlling minority groups, of disparaging minority groups?
So the answer to your question is, if it was a public school, they could not do it because of the First Amendment. If it's a private school like Syracuse University, they could do it. But that's not what Syracuse University has done. Syracuse University has said students have the right to express themselves freely on any subject, provided they do so in a manner that does not violate the Code of Student Conduct. Under our Code of Student Conduct, if there was no intent to harm the other person, it doesn't constitute a violation. It's free speech.
That's Greg Germain, law professor at Syracuse University. We reached out to Syracuse University for a response to Professor Germain, but we did not hear back in time for this broadcast.
As your body grows bigger, your mind must flower. It's great to learn, because knowledge is power. It's Schoolhouse Rocking, the chip off the block of your favorite schoolhouse, Schoolhouse Rock.
The incident reported at Mac Williams Middle School in Fayetteville. That student's mother reached out to us today saying she's gone to the school board and law enforcement about it. Morgan Norwood talking to that mom today in Fayetteville.
Mom says this whole thing started when the teacher was getting on to her son about throwing dirt. The next thing you know, she says that teacher started hurling racial slurs. Well, this mother opted not to be seen, but she wanted to be heard. She claims a teacher at Mac Williams Middle School assaulted her 7th grader.
From my understanding, he walked up to my son, grabbed him by the arm, and told him he wanted to smash his head into a brick.
But the allegations get worse.
And then called him the N-word, and told him that it's people like him that keep him from being able to do his job.
Mom says it's tough for her to gauge how her 13-year-old is feeling.
He just came home and went to sleep that day, didn't do anything, didn't play outside, didn't play on his video game. So I'm pretty sure it affected him in some way.
But she knows the long-term impacts.
This is something that will stick with him for the rest of his life.
Tonight, the teacher in question, agriculture instructor James Cochran, he's suspended with pay while the school system investigates. Meanwhile, Cochran could face charges. The mother filed this report with law enforcement.
I just don't feel like this teacher should even be teaching children any longer.
I don't want us to lose sight that things are getting better. Each successive generation seems to be making progress in changing attitudes when it comes to race. Doesn't mean we're in a post-racial society. It doesn't mean that racism is eliminated. But you know, when I talk to Malia and Sasha, and I listen to their friends and I see them interact, they're better than we are. They're better than we were on these issues. And that's true in every community that I've visited all across the country.
Also new tonight, a student refuses to back down. She claims she was the target of a racial slur, and a Jersey Shore school isn't doing enough. NBC 10's Brandon Hudson shows us why she's pushing for a stronger punishment.
If there's one thing rowing taught Myasia Yoga, it's perseverance. The Absegami High Junior has had her share of highs.
I won silver and bronze during ergathons.
But a low came during a competition at Lake Lenape this weekend. She claims members of another team harassed her and called her a racial slur.
That was the most unforgettable few minutes of my life and crew.
After her race, Myasia said she got on a bus to meet up with her teammates and coaches. Members of Mainland Regional High's team sat next to her. She told NBC 10 some of them called her Rosa Parks.
One other guy blurted out the word, the N-word.
I've been through this. I never thought my daughter would be through this.
Myasia's mom said when she went to speak with an adult from Mainland, one of the students involved tried to apologize.
He said, well, I'm telling you I'm sorry, and I hope it does not get back to my coach.
NBC 10 learned 2 Mainland students have been disciplined. Mainland superintendent also issued an apology saying in part, quote, "We will continue to enforce our commitment to Mainland being a safe and inclusive place for our students, staff, and those we interact with. whether in our school or in the fields. The incident at Lake Lenape left Myasia with an emotional scar, but she says she'll persevere and keep rowing.
We rode through it every day, every year.
In Mays Landing, Brandon Hudson, NBC 10 News.
Yo, New York in the house.
And my guess is they're not documented. So my next call is to ICE to have each one of them kicked out of my country.
A day after his hate-filled tirade at a Midtown restaurant popped up on timelines around the world, Aaron Schlossberg didn't have much to say when Pix 11 confronted him Thursday morning.
Aaron, how does it feel a day after you made national news, dude? A lot of people want to talk to you right now, Aaron. Do you have anything to say?
Schlossberg, who is an attorney and was working a case at Queens Supreme Court in Long Island City, made a beeline into the courtroom, only responding with a smirk. It was a far cry from his now viral rant, where he lashed out at Spanish-speaking workers at Fresh Kitchen on Madison Avenue 2 days earlier.
So your staff is speaking Spanish to customers. If they have the balls to come here and live off of my money, I pay for their welfare, I pay for their ability to be here.
The disturbing episode sparked outrage across social media. And after it made the rounds, it turned out it wasn't the first time Schlossberg was caught on camera spewing hate speech.
It's so bizarre. I honestly don't even know a great way to describe it.
Willie Morris, a New York-based consultant, had a run-in with Schlossberg in 2016 while walking on a street in Midtown.
What country are you from? Who are you? I'm going to call the police.
Morris says Schlossberg intentionally shoved him when he made eye contact. The bizarre attack all came back to Morris when he saw Schlossberg's racist rant on the news.
You don't run into people. I'm a citizen here. You're not. You're an ugly foreigner. So you.
I was born in Massachusetts, grew up in Virginia, went to school in Alabama. You know, it just says to me that the rhetoric that our leaders put out and that we see broadcast, it makes a difference. It emboldens people. It gives people the courage to say things that maybe they wouldn't normally say.
You are not a Jew!
Schlossberg appears to be a regular at anti-immigrant rallies, appearing in at least 2 that surfaced online in the past 24 hours.
You're just angry!
For someone who has so much to say, he was at a loss for words.
Do you have anything to say?
When we approached him today. Well, it's been close to 48 hours since Schlossberg's rant was posted online, and the backlash continues to grow. A local activist is raising money on the crowdsourcing site GoFundMe to hire a mariachi band to perform outside of the attorney's law office in Midtown. That fundraiser has already raised $1,100. Live in the newsroom, I'm Andrew Ramos, Pix 11 News.
Andrew, it's unbelievable. I just had a gun pointed in my face.
You lower your voice.
And it was my fault because I knew it was going to happen. But if a white person sees 2 black men walking towards her and she turns and walks in the other direction, she's a racist, right? Well, I got scared and I didn't say anything. And 10 seconds later, I had a gun in my face.
A Philadelphia Starbucks, a Yale dormitory, a St. Louis clothing store. These are just a few of the places black people have recently been challenged, arrested, or asked to leave, even though they did not commit any crime. Jason Johnson is politics editor at The Root, and he's a professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. He's been writing about why white Americans call the police on black people who haven't done anything wrong. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, Ari.
Are these sorts of things happening more often, or do you think we're just more aware of them?
I think this has always been happening. What's been different is that over the last couple of years, there's been sort of a larger number of white Americans who are empathetic and sympathetic to this kind of harassment, and therefore mainstream press outlets are actually covering it because there's an audience that wants to know now.
The specific details of these incidents vary, but describe what they all have in common.
Oh, what they all have in common is a white person calling the cops on black people for doing nothing. You have a lot of white Americans who basically feel that anyone who is not white is sort of there for their entertainment. So if I don't want them there, I control the space and their bodies, and I'll use the police to do it.
But I know we can't read minds. Do you think what's going through the heads of the white people who call the cops on these black people is, I want that person out? Or are those white people so trained to fear people of color that they think there is actually a genuine threat to them when in fact there is none?
I think it's both. It would be very different if these stories were about someone who's like, hey, I asked that guy what he was doing moving that couch out of the house, and he snarled at me, and I'm like, okay, now I think there's a problem. These people are calling the police first because they think that blacks are inherently dangerous, and they feel that the police are there to work as their personal racism valets and remove black people from the situation.
That is a very provocative phrase, personal racism valets. Explain what you mean by that.
When white people call the police, they know no matter how shaky or inconsistent their story is, the police will listen to them first. You look at what just happened in Oakland, where this woman called the police on a black family for barbecuing in the park. And another white woman came there and said, look, I'm going to stay with this family for 2 hours because I know full well that when the cops get here, this other white woman's story is going to be believed no matter what the black family says. White people know this.
We've heard so many reports about fatal encounters where police shoot unarmed black men. How do these less violent confrontations fit into the larger picture of dynamics between police and people of color today?
The police have a tremendous amount of agency, and they generally choose to escalate or use unnecessary violence when dealing with people of color. You have this instance in Atlanta right now. A 65-year-old grandmother is yanked out of her car by police officers. There's no way that woman could have been a threat to any officer unless she's some sort of ninja. But that's what we see consistently, that this is how cops treat black people.
For many years, the message has been, if you see something, say something. Do you think that message needs to change and people need to take more responsibility for not calling the cops in the absence of a real and significant threat?
The role of the police is as law enforcement. They're supposed to be the last resort. You're supposed to ask questions, attempt to communicate, and resolve things as a functional citizen. So, of course, we shouldn't be calling the police on a regular basis. At the same time, this notion of see something, say something, it can be adjudicated at that point by the police. So, look, if I were to call from my home and say, hey, there's a scruffy-looking white guy outside, I think he might be a murderer, I doubt the police are going to show up in 15 minutes. So It's not about see something, say something. It's what you say you see, how that's perceived as a threat.
So what's the solution here?
Look, what needs to happen is people who make malicious prosecution calls on black people need to be fined. Look, if I pull a fire alarm at a school and the fire truck has to show up and it's no fire, I'm going to get a ticket. I'm probably going to have to go to court about it. If you call the police saying, I see a group of black people and they're jumping up and down and screaming, I don't know if it's Howard's graduation or a riot, and the police show up and say it's Howard's graduation, then that person needs to be ticketed. And I think if people started suffering consequences for this kind of behavior, you would see a drop in these kinds of phone calls.
Jason Johnson is a professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University and politics editor at The Root. Thanks for joining us today.
Anytime, Ari.
We have a very young African-American population in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, third youngest of the 50 largest metro areas. We looked at the entire county, and we found that over half of the African-American men in the county in their 30s had been or were currently in state prison.
Wisconsin's Public Defender's Office assigns private attorneys around 40% of its cases and pays them the lowest rate in the nation. Now the office is having a difficult time finding lawyers willing to take those cases. Tomorrow, the state Supreme Court will take up a petition that would give attorneys a raise. Wisconsin Public Radio's Danielle Kading has more.
On a Sunday afternoon, Travis Slattery is making the rounds at the Taylor County Jail in north central Wisconsin.
Yeah, I just called ahead. I'm here to see a couple clients that are here.
He's a private lawyer, but he's here to do public defense work. He drove an hour and a half through farmland to get here. Next, he'll drive 2 more hours through national forest land to meet with more clients in Ashland, way up on Lake Superior. Slattery spends a lot of time in his wife's Toyota Prius. He calls it the mobile litigation station.
Those 400 miles for less than $20.
Slattery takes cases from the State Public Defender's Office when conflicts come up or they have multiple defendants. But now he's cutting way back because he can make a lot more money on private criminal defense cases.
When I get those, I prioritize those and take less public defender stuff.
The Wisconsin Public Defender's Office pays private lawyers like Slattery just $40 an hour to represent their clients. It's the lowest rate in the nation, and it hasn't changed since 1995 when lawmakers lowered it from $50 $100 an hour. Mark Perrine at the Ashland Public Defender's Office says many lawyers just can't afford to do this work anymore.
The rate of pay is too low. It doesn't cover the overhead for most attorneys who have an office.
Lawmakers have introduced several bills over the last 2 decades to raise the rate, but they haven't gone anywhere. Now, more than 100 lawyers, judges, and officials have submitted comments to the Wisconsin Supreme Court as part of a petition to raise the court-appointed rate to $100 an hour. Milwaukee private attorney John Birdsall with the Wisconsin Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers says if the court doesn't take action,
circuit courts in the state will come to a grinding halt, and people will be sitting in jail for extended periods of time. They already are. And there will be a very, very real constitutional crisis.
The U.S. Constitution guarantees criminal defendants the right to a speedy trial. But the struggle to find lawyers can mean people are waiting in jail for months. The Ashland Public Defender's Office has had to bring in attorneys from as far away as Madison, a 5-hour drive. Those charged with crimes may lose their job or housing while they wait, and the delay takes an emotional toll on crime victims and their families. And David Carroll with the Boston-based Sixth Amendment Center says Wisconsin's low rate could put attorneys' economic interests at odds with their clients' defense.
If you have a financial conflict that you're going to lose more money the more you work on a case, it's going to have a tendency to try to get the lawyer to get the person to plead quicker.
In fact, a 2015 survey of Wisconsin criminal defense lawyers found they do spend less time with public defense clients than with private clients. About half of those surveyed are taking fewer public defense cases than years past. Attorney Travis Slattery thinks raising the rate would help bring some back into the fold, especially in rural Wisconsin.
More people like me who are getting started will be inclined to live in areas like this because you can get more business and get your foot in the door.
He thinks a rate increase may also draw more experienced lawyers who right now can't justify the time on the road and lost income. For NPR News, I'm Danielle Kading.
I want to be a cop.
Plainclothes police officers play a huge role in policing New York City, and a recent article from The Intercept finds they're also responsible for fatally shooting a large number of suspects. George Joseph co-wrote the article with Liam Quigley. George joins us now by Skype. George, good morning.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So how many plainclothes police officers are actually working in the city on any given day, and how many of them are involved in these shootings?
So the NYPD actually doesn't release exact numbers on its amount of plainclothes officers, but by our calculations with consultations from ex-NYPD detectives, we estimated roughly that there's at a minimum about 1,200 of them, which is about 6% of a force of 20,000 NYPD officers. Despite being that roughly small percentage, in our estimate based on open source data of NYPD gunshot killings, since 2000, we found that they accounted for just under a third of all killings.
So under what circumstances are police officers in street clothes? I mean, I've seen them mostly on the subways, but I guess they're everywhere?
Yeah, so there's a variety of circumstances. Generally, they're tasked with being the officers within precincts who do undercover work to try to be more proactive in terms of catching suspected felons, in terms of grabbing illegal guns, catching them in criminal activities such as narcotics trafficking, and sometimes, just as you mentioned, patrolling areas like the subway or protests where they feel crimes may be about to occur.
Now, are these officers held to the same accountability as a uniformed officer?
Yeah, they're certainly the same sort of accountability practices that a uniformed officer would have, except in terms of operational accountability practices such as body cameras. According to CCRB data, they've only found one case where a plainclothes officer was wearing a body camera. So that recent accountability push doesn't seem to be covering these types of officers.
And what did you hear from people about their encounters with plainclothes officers versus a uniformed officer?
So after the shooting of Saheed Vassell, we went to the barbershop where he used to work, and what residents hanging out there told us was that in that neighborhood, oftentimes plainclothes officers, in their experience, will be very aggressive, in some cases instigating sort of aggressive conversations, jumping out of cars, and sort of just conducting supposedly general street harassment. And this may come from the nature, they argue, of these kind of aggressive, proactive tactics. But what it means on the day-to-day is that, unlike relations with neighborhood cops where they may know those officers and those beat officers may know the people, the characters of the neighborhood, these officers are coming in with a much more aggressive and potentially dangerous approach.
So the other examples include back in 1999, there was the Amadou Diallo case. There was Sean Bell in 2006, to name a few, killed by plainclothes officers. Based on your analysis, is a suspect more at risk of fatally being shot by a plainclothes officer than one in uniform?
Yes, certainly. There's about one plainclothes officer for every 15 uniformed officers, yet they're accounting for, again, a really disproportionate amount of these shootings, including many of the most high-profile ones.
Are plainclothes officers themselves, though, more at risk because civilians don't know they're being approached by members of the NYPD?
Yeah, we didn't do a data analysis on that, but many of the shootings of officers that you see in recent years are of plainclothes officers, and that's because, as we said, they're proactively engaging with suspects. And if you're sort of getting in a situation where you're getting in car chases or foot chases with individuals who may be possessing guns and also not very clearly identifying yourself by your uniform, in those kind of split seconds of danger, shootings can go off, people can make mistakes, and people, including officers, can be in danger, yes.
Does the NYPD track how often plainclothes officers use their weapons?
The NYPD published some data which we reviewed in 2016, which found that in so-called adversarial encounters, over 50% of the individuals involved within the NYPD were plainclothes officers, but we don't have that sort of shooting data specifically.
Okay, George Joseph, criminal justice reporter for The Intercept, joining us by Skype this morning. George, thanks so much.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Looking at me to see if my eyes open. Cause I've been drinking and I've been smoking and flying down 285, but I'm focused.
Rapper T.I. has been arrested in Atlanta, or at least a country club gated community that he lives in the area. This was in Henry County, to be exact. Now, police not only arrested him, he was charged with a number of misdemeanors, including disorderly conduct, public drunkenness, and simple assault. So what did he do exactly? Turns out that he attempted to re-enter the gated community that he lives in while he was drunk, or at least that's what the police are alleging. Now, he apparently didn't have a key to get back into the community, to get into the gate, and he tried communicating with the security guard who was there. His lawyer says that the security guard was asleep and it was hard to get him to wake up, but a verbal altercation ensued. And we don't have very many details as to what was said, how it was said. But nonetheless, let me give you the details that we have at this moment. So Henry County Police Chief Mike Ireland said that T.I. was arrested around 4:30 a.m. after he got into an argument with the security guard. Clifford Harris, which is his real name, had lost his key and the guard wouldn't let him into the community. His lawyer says, quote, the rapper was wrongfully arrested. He claims the guard was asleep when his client arrived at the guardhouse, and it took, quote, some time to wake up the sleeping guard. At some point, they actually called T.I.'s wife to confirm that he does, in fact, live in this gated community, and she did confirm it and said, let him in immediately, but the guard refused to do so. Police were called, and he was arrested.
Okay, so as I read the headline, I thought, well, this depends, and I'll tell you what it depends on. So if you're going into your own gated community, number one, it depends. Do you have a key? If you have a key or an ID or whatever that lets you in and the guard doesn't let you in, then he's totally wrong and it's outrageous what happened. In this case, he didn't have a key. Okay, well, then we go to point number two. It depends. Can he call someone inside the gated community in the house to let him in, or does he not? And if he doesn't, and there's no one to vouch that he's actually T.I. and lives there, well, then the guard is right. And he's like, look, man, you say you live here, and I hear you, but I can't, it's my job to not let you in unless I've got some evidence of that. But in this case, he did call the house. The guard called the house, and the house said, yeah, that's my husband. Let him in.
Yeah.
So why on God's green earth wouldn't you let him in? You know, it might be that that whole discussion about waking up the guard, which seems like, so what? Who cares if you had to wake up the guard? Might be a reference to the fact that because of that, they caught feelings on both sides.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. But look, I don't know if race plays a role. I don't know the race of the security guard. But it's hard not to think that it does. That if there's a gated community where a white person comes in and says, call my wife, no matter how drunk they are. You know how many times I've got into my own house drunk? That's kind of how it works, right? And if the wife says, yeah, let him in, and they don't let him in, that has got to be a minuscule percentage of the instances.
Yeah.
So that's what we're worried about here.
So for me, things really started to take an extremely negative turn when they called his wife, and she confirmed that he lived there, and they still wouldn't let him in. At that point, they completely lost me. Because you're right, Cenk. Look, we don't have evidence of what was said, how this all played a role. Like the simple assault misdemeanor, why? Why was he charged with simple assault? Like, we don't know exactly what happened. But I will say this. At the point where it's been confirmed that I live in this community and you're denying me entry to my own property, that's when I get extremely angry and upset. And by the way, you're right in saying we don't know if race plays a role in this, but here's what I do know. I do know that living in any situation where you have to deal with gatekeepers, a homeowners association, you know, any type of gated community, any type of condo or townhouse community, it is the worst situation. Do not get yourself involved because people are up your butt constantly, right? And it doesn't matter what your race is. I have that experience on a regular basis. The people living in the same area, same building, whatever it is, they question everyone, they harass everyone. They're just incredibly, overwhelmingly unbearable. And so just don't. I know it seems great to live in a gated community or an HOA situation. Just don't. Just don't. Because this is what you're going to have to deal with regularly. Yes.
Okay, so, but look, if you're TI and you've seen the news lately that a woman going to Yale is questioned for sleeping at Yale in the dorm that she's in. The guys get kicked out of the Starbucks. They're African American, and the list goes on. The guys get called. They're at a barbecue. The cops get called on them. Again, they're in the neighborhood. Why? They live there, right? And so now he lives there, and he's made a lot of money, and he's got a really nice house. And they called his wife, and she confirms, yeah, he lives here.
Yes,
and
I
the
know.
guard still says no. I think that he gets to be A, super frustrated, which is what you're saying, and B, he gets to wonder if it might be about race.
No, by the way, let me be clear. Of course, that is a potential factor, and of course he gets to wonder about it. I'm not saying that. And by the way, I also want to be clear that I'm not trying to blame him for living in a gated community. I'm just saying that, look, property owners, just people in any given neighborhood, they get insane when it comes to keeping the neighborhood safe or whatever, right? And it gets a lot worse when you're in a homeowners association type environment where people have the justification to constantly harass you or harass people that they think might be dangerous. You know what I'm saying?
Which then often leads to discrimination based on the unconscious biases in people's heads. Who do they view to be a danger? Right?
Yeah. And
so now, lastly, and maybe the most important part is, okay, people caught feelings, the guard and TI, whatever, okay, it's 4:30 in the morning, etc. The cops, when you show up, you're supposed to say, hey, does he belong here or does he not belong here? Did you call the house? Yes. Did the house say to let him in? Yes. We're done with it. Then the cops, you know what they could do? They could escort TI to the house. Mm-hmm. They could knock on the door and say, hey, ma'am, is this your husband?
Exactly.
Yes. And we're done with it. But instead, well, you defied any kind of authority, even though you're totally logically correct, right? But we're not going to let you into your own house that you paid a ton of money for, right? And instead, since you defied a security guard, we're going to arrest you. and we're going to do this laundry list of charges. And look, if T.I. was upset and he's yelling, I guarantee you the cops were like, how dare you, right? But think about, why is he upset? Is there a chance that he's right? Did that ever occur to you?
That's my statement, that he's the ultimate expression of that type of mentality. Not Adolf Hitler, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Wow.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because this is what ultimately this white supremacy at its greatest is that, particularly aiming at the black male, feminize the black male and then take him and kill him after that. I mean, they're not enough just to make him into a thing, but then methodically and with an expression of affection, kill him.
All right, Leah, what's this next question about?
Okay, so this next one comes from a couple in Raleigh, and they're white, and right now they're foster parents to a 6-year-old black boy.
Mm-hmm.
But recently they had a big issue come up when they let their foster son paint his nails.
His biological family was very upset by this and claimed we were going against his culture by allowing him to paint his nails. Additionally, there are several other typical gender socialization issues that our family does not adhere to that appear to be very important to his biological family. For example, things such as boys having to be tough and not showing emotion, or not being able to like the movie Frozen because it's just for girls. The bottom line, are we damaging our 6-year-old or somehow ill-preparing him for the hyper-masculine culture he may return to one day by allowing him to paint his nails, sing Let It Go, and cry when he's sad? Is this really a racial, cultural, gender issue that we should be in tune with?
Ooh.
Yeah,
There's something about that question.
There's a lot about that question. There's a lot of things about that question.
Yeah, that question has everything in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first part is, how are race and gender expression all connected, and how is that playing out in this situation? I spoke to a couple of experts, and everyone I spoke to was pretty adamant to say that letting a little boy paint his nails or sing Let It Go or cry is certainly not going against black culture.
Black people show up in all sorts of different shapes, sizes, forms, genders, sexes, sexualities, and expressions. Blackness is full.
So that was Jen Jackson, and she is a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago, and she studies blackness and gender.
And so I do not think it's a racial cultural phenomenon, but I do think that what his biological family is likely contending with is this structural contention of how will this young man be situated when he, grows up.
It's also important to remember that policing expressions of gender identity is pretty common in white families, Asian families, Latino families. So that particular parent getting upset does not represent black culture as a whole. Mark Anthony Neal, the other expert I spoke to, he's the chair of the African American Studies Department at Duke University, wanted to emphasize the fact that there are different pressures around black people and black families to conform. Mm-hmm. So here's what Mark Anthony Neal had to say about black masculinity.
In many ways, African-American people, African-American parents are very much invested in very normative gender standards because of the way that blackness has been treated as an abnormality. So one of the ways that black folks have historically fit in line with the larger society is to perform very conservative and rigid gender performances so that they're not looked at as strange and unusual within their context. When you attach that also to a larger history of the idea that white racism, white supremacy has very specifically attempted to demasculate or emasculate black men and boys, you get these added pressures of this idea that black men and boys have to even counter these efforts to emasculate them with a hyper-performance of masculinity.
Some of the history he's talking about is that history of lynching and castration of black men that goes way back to the beginning of our country.
So one of the things that I guess jumps out to me here, though, is like the idea that black men are hypermasculine seems I just want to push back on it a little bit. The way that black people doing the same thing that white people are doing at a given time seems like salient in a different way, right? It's like, oh, look at them doing this thing. And of course, like if there are all these black men on TV who are athletes or whatever, there's a way in which that gets like magnified.
So I asked Mark about that. And one of the things he said is that that's true, that we see in our culture, black men are noticed more. The people who kind of rise to the top are treated like they're different in some way, like they're superhuman. He pointed to Superfly, that iconic 1972 film.
This dude is bad, and he ain't just fly. He's super fly, yeah, super fly. When it comes to women, they come to him, but it's still not enough.
Or he said they've also been kind of treated as like animals, and so when he talked about LeBron James, for example, and how LeBron James, people don't talk about him as just like a man who works hard. They talk about him as like almost like a beast, like just like a different kind of physical specimen, where his masculinity is kind of like put forward in a way that you don't see with white athletes or white entertainers.
But what about this point that he made, which I mean, it definitely resonated with me, which is that African-American parents are invested in normative gender standards because of the way blackness has been treated as an abnormality. I mean, I think the same can be said for Latino parents, that, you know, you want to be very rigidly whatever you're supposed to be in society, so that people don't look at you like you're different or treat you like you're different or discriminated against you. You know, I think there's something to be said for that.
I think that kind of gets into a point he made about respectability politics and sort of like dressing in a way and performing sort of social roles in a way that's very conservative. So one of the examples he talked about was at Morehouse. Do we need to do
explanatory comment here about Morehouse? Morehouse is this very old, very bougie, historically black college that's all men. Martin Luther King went there. A bunch of very famous black people went there. Anyway, sorry. That's it.
Right. So there is a history and kind of like a pedigree that goes with Morehouse.
The Morehouse man, yep.
And I think respectability politics has often been kind of associated with Morehouse. But what he was saying is that, historically speaking, black men at Morehouse get kind of policed in two directions. So there's like rules against wearing sagging pants and doing the whole like low hat, grills, which he described as sort of what looks like the ultra masculine kind of expressions of gender.
And to Jean's point, that's a racially coded expression of masculinity
in a different way than a suit and a tie.
Right, exactly. But then on the other side of that, there's also people have gotten in trouble for wearing high heels or for kind of any sort of public expression of queerness.
So there's like a class thing here and a gender thing here.
Exactly.
We haven't really answered the question. I mean, we've complicated things here. What should this foster parent do? Let his kid paint his nails knowing all this, or say, no, we're not going to do that from here on out?
Well, I think kind of broadly, the advice for these parents is sort of the same advice we would give to any parents raising kids from a different kind of racial or cultural background, which is that
brown people.
Right. You need to surround this kid with black people who can show different gender expressions. And then in addition to the people around you, it's also a matter of the media that you're consuming. So there's nothing wrong with having him paint his nails and watching Frozen, but Frozen is also a movie with very few black people in it.
That was the first thing I thought. Yeah.
Right. So
not because it's a girls' movie.
Right.
Exactly. So maybe it's, and this is, again, it's a hard thing to do because there aren't as many movies with black characters and a wide expression of black characters, but it's about finding age-appropriate black media to expose this kid to and have him kind of grow up with.
Can I ask for a call out from our listeners here? Like, if there's age-appropriate black media that shows like or people POC media that shows like a broad expression of gender performance and gender identity, send us a shout at codeswitch@npr.org.
Yeah, definitely, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Leah.
Thanks, guys.
But because white Americans can keep themselves separate from black Americans, there is a sense that this other will never be who I am. So if there is a way to get people to understand. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't know. Robin Kelly says that we're going to need a surrealist moment. There's going to have to be something that breaks the continuum. Because until white women start giving birth to black babies, I think we are going to stay living in these incommensurable experiences.
Like the opportunities came not so much through your black father, but through your white mama.
Yeah,
we've got white mamas for everybody.
Later this month, Starbucks will close its more than 8,000 coffee shops for an afternoon of anti-bias training. The aim is to raise their sensitivity of the employees around race and ethnicity after last month's episode at a Philadelphia shop where the police were called about two black men simply sitting and waiting. Talks on the subject are always sensitive, and tonight, writer Ijoma Oluo shares her humble opinion on why that talk can be so fraught, even with one's own mother.
Here's the thing about my mom. My mom, who is white, is the kindest, most generous person I've ever known. But she's also exhausting. She's a bundle of whimsy and emotion, and she doesn't always think before she speaks. So when she left me a voicemail saying that she had had an epiphany about race and I should call her back right away, I really did not want to do that. Don't get me wrong. I talk about race every day as an activist and educator. And while I had noticed that my work on race had started to build some awkward distance between my mom and me, I still didn't want to talk about race with her. I mean, she's my mom. It's personal and awkward, like talking to your mom about sex. Turns out, I didn't need to worry about whether to call her back because, like many moms, she immediately called me back and kept calling until I answered the phone. The conversation was as bad as I'd feared, maybe worse. She'd made a joke at work that had to do with race. Not a racist joke, but one that was more a joke for the black community. And a black colleague had challenged her. What do you know about being black? Well, my mom was pretty indignant at first. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know I raised 3 black kids. I was cringing as she said this to me. Had she not read my work? And then came her epiphany. She realized that her coworker must face so much racism as a black man that he couldn't tell who the good white people were. And that if she were in his shoes, she'd probably be angry all the time too. That was the full epiphany. She had decided that the next day she was going to march over to her coworker and explain that she had raised 3 black kids, so she got it. I literally shouted, "No!" like people do in action movies when they try to stop their friends from getting into the car that is rigged with explosives. Then I took a deep breath. I tried to explain that being a white woman who loves black people, who has even given birth to black people, is still very different from living as a black person and experiencing firsthand the full force of a white society every day of your life. She asked if she at least got credit for doing black hair for all those years. I said no. It was a long conversation, and was it painful. But it opened up a new way of seeing each other. So, as awful as it was, I'm glad the conversation happened. It is in our conversations about race and racism that we find understanding, empathy, and opportunities to make real change in our day-to-day lives. Start talking. More importantly, start listening. It is not always pleasant to talk about race. In fact, it almost never is. But it is worth it.
Ijoma Oluo.
White people kill for fun. White people kill for fun. White people kill for fun. White people kill for fun.
Senator's son, driven off the road last Thursday, attacked, their car damaged, and they were called racial slurs.
Well, the mother tells me that witnesses backed up her story to police and adds that the people who did it called law enforcement to admit what they did. But now, nearly a week later, still no one has been arrested. She wants to know why not.
Tried to run us off the road saying, "You get the out of our country, get the
out of our country, and we would like, you know what I mean, destroy.
Natia Shim and her 17-year-old son were on their way to Latham Farms last Thursday afternoon to fill out job applications for the soon-to-be high school graduate when all of a sudden, she says, a green truck with lights on top of it rammed her car onto the shoulder.
All he kept saying was, Mommy, they're going to kill us, they're going to kill us, you know what I mean? And I'm just sitting there like, just go, and I'm ducking down in the seat.
Natia says the truck cut them off at the exit ramp to Latham. Then at least 3 men and 2 women, one older and one younger, got out and began destroying her mirrors, hitting the car with bats, smashing in a window. She later learned from witnesses with a frying pan. This all while shouting obscenities and racial slurs.
And they're screaming that they are the white supremacists. We do not belong in their country.
Her son managed to maneuver out of the chaos, and she called 911. Because the incident happened on a state road, New York State Police began investigating. Natia says in the time she was being interrogated at Troop G, 7 eyewitnesses called to corroborate her story. But then she says a call came in from the perpetrators admitting they did it.
The people that did it said, oh, we thought that her vehicle was the vehicle who robbed my son from for a radio a day prior in Waterville.
Natia says the damage is at least $3,000 worth, but she doesn't feel safe living in her home. She says the same vehicle drove past her house on Sunday. She doesn't have the money, but says she has no choice but to pick up and move her 2 sons.
They took it in their own hands and chased down the wrong car all the way from Troy all the way to Latham to kill me and my son. How are we supposed to feel safe?
We reached out to state police today who told us they are still taking in sworn depositions from witnesses, and one key witness is from out of state. Trooper Mark Siepel told us the process takes time. As for Natia, she says she and her son had nothing to do with that stolen radio in Waterville, and she wants police to arrest the people she says terrorized her and her son.
We have to come to terms with this dynamic so that we become the masters of it. So all of this is about preventing white genetic annihilation, ensuring white genetic survival. That's what this power equation is all about. Is there anybody in the room that think that white people don't care whether they disappear or not?
Birth rates in the USA have dropped to their lowest annual levels in 3 decades, falling for nearly every group of women, and part of a longer decline that dates back to the Great Recession. Amna Nawaz looks at some of the reasons why this may be happening.
More than 3.8 million babies were born in the United States last year. But last year's drop in the nation's birth rate, about 2% overall, was the largest drop in a single year since 2010. The rate even fell slightly for women in their 30s. And the teen birth rate continued its dramatic nosedive since the early 90s, down 55% since 2007. Last year, the only group to see a higher birth rate was women in their 40s. All this amid some concerns about America's aging population. Hans-Peter Kohler, who studies fertility and birth rates in this country and many others at the University of Pennsylvania, joins me now. Dr. Kohler, thanks so much for making the time. Let me ask you about these numbers now. The lowest number of recorded births in 30 years, the largest single drop since 2010. It paints a pretty grim picture, is it?
So this report is big news, and on the other hand, not all that surprising. So the U.S. stood out among high-income countries as one that had relatively high fertility. And the Great Recession changed that, and across many high-income countries, the recession resulted in declining fertility rates. The really surprising part is that we've now been quite some years through the recession, and unemployment rates is very low, and that trend hasn't changed. So these low fertility rates, despite relatively good economic conditions, are really surprising. I wouldn't argue that they're a disaster or particularly worrisome. I would argue that the U.S. demographics in general continue to be relatively healthy, at least compared to many other high-income countries.
So let's talk about the economic anxiety part of this. Obviously, a lot of people point towards that as a theory why the birth rate declines. But as you mentioned, we're out of a recession now. So how do you look at these numbers? How do you explain this decline?
So Presumably, a big part is driven by a delay of childbearing. So there have been big declines in teenage fertility rates, and that is good news because that presumably indicates a big decline in unintended or mistimed pregnancies. And across adult ages, that's presumably a delay of childbearing resulting from, on one hand, a desire to have children at later ages, often perhaps pressured by economic stress in early adulthood or high housing prices or desires to actually invest in child quality. And so these trends combined into a pattern where fertility and parenthood is going to be increasingly later. That's going to be across the board, and the U.S. shares this across many high-income countries.
A lot of people sometimes float a theory about immigration playing a role in birth rates increasing or declining. Tell me about that.
I don't think immigration has a big factor in this story. So immigrant fertility adjusts relatively quickly to the U.S. native fertility. And I don't think changes in immigration policy or immigration flows had a big contribution to these recent declines in total fertility rates.
So, Dr. Kohler, tell me about why we care so much about birth rate. Obviously, people will pay attention to these numbers. They'll note these declines. But what do the numbers say about the health or the trajectory of America right now?
Many would see the number of children as an indicator of the well-being of the adult population, from the notion that individuals who are satisfied with their life and have relatively good economic prospects are more likely to have children. The other reason we care about this is that the children born today are obviously the workers 25 years down the road, and are retirees some 60, 70 years down the road. And so the number of births are going to shape the overall size and structure of the U.S. population, and that has a magnitude of implications on both the economic situation and social situation of the United States. So in the long term, if this trend persists, they're going to have profound implication. Any annual number of births probably has relatively small implications.
So, Dr. Kohler, you mentioned these numbers aren't terribly surprising to you. They're also not terribly worrisome right now. At what point do you start to get worried?
Well, if we compare the U.S. to other high-income countries, we could see that fertility could drop a lot lower. So total fertility rates drop to rates like 1.2 in many Southern European countries. They're at these levels in South Korea, and we're at somewhat higher levels in Japan. So on one hand, there's quite a bit of possibility for further declines in fertility. And once we get to very low fertility, or what I have called lowest low fertility at some point, then the kind of implications of rapidly aging populations and possibly declining labor force become very difficult to manage through social policies.
Dr. Hans-Peter Kohler at the University of Pennsylvania, thank you for your time.
You're most welcome.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Saturday, May 19th, 2018, so I have been told. This is our weekly compensatory call-in. Dial in if you have commentary on any of the sound clips that we just heard, any of the other news items that took place over the past week or so. If you have counter-racist suggestions, the number to dial, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Before we get to folks who dialed in, I think I mentioned this, I believe, on the Workplace Racism broadcast this past Thursday, at the beginning of the program. Just thinking, we did our 9-year anniversary a few months back, hopefully, February, well, if the system of white supremacy can be eradicated before February, that would be fantastic. If not, we'll be here, hopefully, for our 10-year anniversary. So just looking back over the years of broadcasting, man, I remember, and it has been on my mind for whatever reason this week, I remember circa 2012, 2013, some people who might be listening live at this very moment who thought or who verbalized, they didn't just think, verbalized on a regular basis that two of the most dangerous individuals for black people in the known universe since menthol cigarettes and Martin were President Barack Obama, Melissa Harris Perry. I am just reflecting on that, where we are, May 19, 2018. So I have been told, reflecting on that analysis, 2012, 2013, about the danger of those two individuals and where things are now. If any of the folks are listening live who took that position or had those thoughts that those folks were super dangerous at that time, if you have any thoughts or commentary reflecting, I guess since 5-6 years have passed, if you have a different assessment now, that would be grand to hear. But I do remember a lot of that from 2012, 2013. I think some of it is in the C.O.W.S archives. Anywho, we are listener-supported, counter-racist, we are listener-supported, counter-racist radio. Invest if you think the program is constructive. You can visit my blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com, racism-notes.blogspot.com. When you hit the blog, my PayPal button is in the top right corner. Tremendous thanks to all of the listeners, investors who have supported 10 years of the C.O.W.S counter-racist broadcasting. I hope the program has been and continues to be worthy of your time and energy. I am super grateful for the support. You can also support via my wish list at Amazon.com. It is linked on my blog. It's listed at Amazon under Gus T Renegade, posted on Facebook and Twitter. Again, huge thanks, huge appreciation to all of the listeners who have nabbed items over the past decade. The headphones I am wearing right now. Again, I hope the program has helped victims of white supremacy get an accurate understanding of the problem we face as victims of white supremacy. Accurate understanding of what it means to be classified as white, and some suggestions to help us solve this problem immediately. A few things that I wanted to mention before I get to some of the folks who dialed in. First and foremost, the counter-racist t-shirts. Man, talk about reflecting. I did not want to do these t-shirts. I feel compelled to say that like every time, because this is an investment of time and energy that I did not want to do, and it took quite a bit of cajoling to get me to do this way back in 2012. I cannot believe 6 years later, Melissa Harris Perry has lost her show, Barack Obama is gone, and Gus is still here talking about these t-shirts that I did not want to do to begin with. That out of the way, our good supporter, investor, Trav, who has did a lot of the work to convince Gus that this would be a worthwhile investment to do the t-shirts. He says that he can easily do another round of printing of t-shirts. Apparently, we had shirts left over, and all of those are now gone, and there was still a demand for t-shirts. So, all of the people who would like a C.O.W.S t-shirt. Doesn't matter if you have emailed Gus before, if you emailed Gus 10 years ago, 20 years ago. If you would like a shirt and you don't have one, they are $25. That includes shipping. If it was up to Gus, we would move the price point up enough to scale back the demand so we don't have to keep doing this. They would be $50, $500, whatever it needs to be so that I don't have to keep getting nagged about these. But we're going to nix that as well. You do not email Gus about these shirts. You email cowsshirts@gmail.com. C-O-W-S in all capital letters. cowsshirts@gmail.com. If you email listener, supporter, Trav, he will give you all of the information that you need about shirt sizes, if you want multiple shirts, all of that. We had some folks who are outside the United States who purchased shirts when we did them the first time. So if we have international listeners who would like a shirt, we can handle that. No, Trav can handle that, no problem. Obviously, the shipping will be a little bit more, but we were able to make that happen, I think, without too many problems last time. So anybody, if you would like a Cows shirt and you do not have one, the most important thing to remember is do not email Gus T about the shirts. Email cowsshirts@gmail.com. C-O-W-S, all in capital letters, cowsshirts@gmail.com. Shirts is plural. Email Trav. He'll give you all of the info you need. I think he even has a size chart. The shirts will this time around say, please treat me like a white person. That's what I wanted it to say the first time around after all the cajoling, and I agreed, we went with respect, but that way we can have two different ones and see if we get a different response. I'll see if we can get that done. Please treat me like I am a white person. $25. cowsshirts@gmail.com. Next, Claudia Rankin, victim of white supremacy, black female. I mentioned her last week. She is the victim in the segment who said she was asked during an interview, what is it going to take to get a permanent resolution to racism? And she said, after some speaking, she said, until white women start having black babies. Cowbell. She was here in Seattle, Washington this here week on Tuesday, and it was sold out. I had been seeing flyers for the event on my way to yoga class. I'd seen the flyers repeatedly, and maybe that was why I played that segment last week. I remembered it from some years back, but she was here, and I am sure I'd be willing to bet to do some major wagering, given the Supreme Court decision this week, that there was probably at least one, if not several, white women who have had sexual intercourse with a black person and had a pregnancy as a result. I'm pretty sure that was the case here in Seattle. Next, there were a number of points in the audio clips this week where victims of white supremacy were speaking, and Claudia Rankin has VGQ as well, Victims Guaranteed Qualified. But there were a number of victims of white supremacy who were speaking about racism in the segments, and they were referring to individuals classified as white, but they didn't want to say that. They said larger society, people from a privileged identity. Wow. In my view, none of these words are helping us solve this problem. The beginning of knowledge is by accurately identifying what it is we're talking about. Let's accurately identify who it is that is causing the problem, and it's not people from a privileged identity. I don't even know what that means, and to my view, it just gets worse and worse and worse when we are, for whatever reason, unwilling to accurately identify individuals classified as white. That's who's causing the problem. Next, that segment in fact, I won't even say anything about that segment. I suspect you all will have a lot to say. The segment about the white men who adopted the black child and were questioning the fingernails. I won't even say anything about that segment. I will tell you that was a portion of a larger segment. A earlier clip in the same broadcast, the question that they dealt with was what, and this was from a white parent also, what to do with a white child who is afraid of black people. And she gave examples, the white parent who was writing in, she said, like, she'll take him to the playground or out to the park, public places. They'll see black people and the black people will be loud or cursing or whatever they're doing. And he's afraid, and he just, she can tell he doesn't want to be around them. He's said as much. I think she said her son was like 12. And what to do. That was in the earlier segment. Almost thought about playing that one as well, but how much, can't play everything. But I thought that was brilliant white supremacist propaganda. I am waiting for the segment where it is a black parent calling in to talk about how their child is afraid of white people. That would be the appropriate segment. My goodness. They saw that Unabomber segment. They saw a photo of Timothy McVeigh. They saw Dylan Roof. I mean, my goodness, my child has just totally frightened, petrified of whites. Everybody, all of them, white men, white women, white children, all of them. Where is that segment at in a system of white supremacy? I don't want to hear anything about white people being afraid, some 12-year-old racist in training being fearful of black people. I feel like, if anything, that just further gives an opportunity to project this notion that there is something frightening about black people, because they said they were talking loud. And, it's Negroes. My gosh, you never know if they're going to go crazy and steal your watermelon. Next, I said I wasn't going to say anything about that segment. The segment on Miss Aluo, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, because I think it was mispronounced in the segment. That was from PBS with the white newscaster. I thought that was an act of racism, white supremacy myself. Gus T, I say all the time, I am ignorant. I'm a victim of white supremacy. I have been greatly retarded. I don't have a staff sending me notes with correct phonetic pronunciations for everyone's name or any other word that I might have to say during a broadcast. If you work on PBS, you have a full staff. You have makeup and everything. You should be able to pronounce these people's names correctly. That was one. That segment is exactly why I use my mute button throughout the broadcast. Wow. Wow. That segment right there, if Puff is listening, if you remember, like I said, we have been on long enough. I do a lot of reflecting about the broadcast now. Puff, if you remember, in 2016, we did a compensatory program, compensatory call-in. And I made a point of emphasizing that I say when individuals like Miss Aluo or former President Barack Obama or Melissa Harris Perry, when I identify these individuals as non-white with a white parent, I say, oh yeah, that's major significant to me. If a non-white parent has a white parent, non-white person has a white parent, that segment that you heard right there, exhibit number 5,302 at this point. Wow. Wow. I wish I had the joke that her white mother, Miss Aluo, has a white parent. She lives right here in Seattle with Gus T. I wish she shared what joke her white mother told the black people. Why? And I wish Claudia Rankin, who was here in Seattle this week, I wish she could have heard that. Like, wow, you're thinking about racism, white supremacy. Reassessment. We got a lot of white women who have had sexual intercourse with a black male. It has not solved the problem of racism, white supremacy. If anything, it has made it substantially worse. Confusion is lethal. Wow. There were so many things just about within that segment, even her saying her work on race. She didn't say she did work on racism. She said she did work on race. Huge, so many things that I could say about that segment. Wow. Anyway, I will stop there. The number to dial 641-715-3640. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. If we have any listeners in the Austin, Texas area, we have a listener who wrote in, he would like contact with, I guess, codified listeners in the Austin, Texas area. You can drop me an email, untiljustice@gmail.com, or other areas. I try to connect as I can. Again, for this program, no metaphors, please. Racists frequently invoke analogies, comparisons, metaphors to practice deception, white supremacy. Victims of white supremacy frequently, we are still learning, Gus T Renegade included. We've not come to conclusions on some topics, so we will use a metaphor in substitute of logic. Often that produces a lot of confusion. For this broadcast, if we could just be explicit, direct about what it is we want to say. If you need more time to think, that is fine. But if we could not use metaphors, I will prompt about that. Thank you kindly. If you could take about 5 minutes to share your thoughts, observations, that would be great. Make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak at least once. And then if you have extra questions or comments, once everyone has spoken once, you should be able to share your additional thoughts. Also, if you could use your mute button, that would be extra appreciated, just to make sure that we keep down the background noise and preserve the quality of the broadcast. Just helps to not have a lot of, to have to talk over a lot of distortion. Much obliged. That said, we will get to the first few folks who dialed in with a hand up. We will be here tomorrow, the return of the Global Sunday Talk on Racism, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, fitting with the royal tragedy that took place this weekend. We will be on tomorrow. I'm sure that will come up in the discussion, but Global Sunday Talk on Racism tomorrow. Back first time for 2018 calendar year. First few folks who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open. If you have commentary, proceed.
Can I be heard?
Let's get our female caller first. Is this Droptomania?
Yes. How you doing, Gus?
Right poorly.
I love it when you say that. I am also. Well, Gus, I wanted to just bring up a subject that's it's basically like a counter-racism that I think the callers may be interested in. I think that it's important that we maybe investigate it in regards to this topic. It's a topic regarding targeted individuals and organized gang stalking, organized stalking. It's basically like an extension of the COINTELPRO program. And what they're doing is, what they've been doing is using technology, new technology that they have for mind control and harassment. There are some people that I would suggest that we look into. One of the gentlemen is called John Hall. He's written a book called New Breed and the Guinea Pig, and it's also ex-CIA agent named Robert Duncan. He did the voice V2K is a voice to skull technology. What happens is you have these people that just stalk you. I've been hearing when we were discussing the last week talking about surveillance. It's basically taking the whole surveillance thing. They basically surveil you and stalk you, and you have strangers just following you and things like that. So there's a lot of information on that. There's books that you can look up in regards to this information about people blatantly stalking you. Some of the things that I've been hearing on the show, it sounds like some of the workplace racism. How I heard of different situations where people have been stalked on a job and different situations like that. I have gone some situations like this also, and how Homeland Security is involved, NASA, and all these different types of governmental agencies are involved in this. So I just think that what it is they try to make you seem like you're crazy. They mimic schizophrenia and things like that. But so if you call the police or you try to get the police involved in it, it makes it look like you're out of your mind. But I just wanted to put that information out there and to see what you thought about that information. And I'll mute my line. Thank you.
I think a number, particularly, you think you mentioned workplace racism specifically. I think Stacey in the UK and a number of other participants have talked about being stalked on the job, where they've had whites who are following them around and kind of just surveilling them wherever they happen to be in the facility. And I mean, that's throughout the system of white supremacy. I'm even thinking back, Dr. Martin Kevorkian, on a previous broadcast, he was talking about Frederick Douglass, and he was saying that some of the white terrorists on the plantation, that they would just pop out all of a sudden, all the time, to just have them in a state of paranoia that whites are constantly watching you. And it sounds like, and we've had a lot of people in workplace racism actually talking about that as well, where they weren't saying that they were being followed per se, but they were having whites who were jumping up and trying to startle them, jumping up and surprising them. So it's the same type of thing. That is the system of racism, white supremacy. I would just say you're not being paranoid. If anything, you should not be surprised. White people, or I would say the thing that they study most in the known universe is their niggers. So yeah, be mindful of that at all times. Thank you for the book suggestions. Reading is more important than watching television, Dr. Welsing. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, if you had commentary, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Greetings, Thomas.
Oh, can I be heard? Okay, go ahead, Thomas. You go ahead, Paul. Greetings, everybody. This is Puff. Thanks, Thomas. Just wanted to make a few quick comments about the having a white parent. That is so traumatic to me. That clip that you played earlier with the man with the letting the boy paint his nails or whatever. That's it just shows that, you know, as a white parent, that as white parents, they're getting the double dose of racism there, and not only culturally, but you confusing a child and not giving them the correct blueprint. And it's purposefully done. Why would you even buy that for your son? It don't have anything. And then see, they put this on and this goes back to the gay agenda that they are trying to do here. The point is, this is another pattern of racial aggression. Is, you know, with the degenderization, you know, that it's okay, quote unquote, not okay, but that we're saying that this is acceptable behavior for a boy to paint his nails, and, you know, it's going to the gay agenda, and it's something that should be celebrated, and it really is not. In fact, see, to be an arch deceiver, you got to know the truth, but you don't never put the truth out there. The HIV/AIDS statistics show that, you know, 65% of the people who have AIDS caught it from man-to-man contact. And so they know the facts, but they steady, you know, portraying this behavior onto our children. Is you know, with the painting the nails, and then you see clan member Charlize Theron, her son, the one that he adopted, he got a Elsa ponytail. And so is this Frozen? I've never seen that movie. Frozen, is that portraying the white culture or what? I mean, this thing, you should want a Nordic princess and all this old stuff. I see it on the TV, but I don't, you know, I've never seen that movie. But, you know, it's just a constant perpetrating of white culture. And, you know, I just think that's a thing that they play in white culture. And as far as, you know, having a white parent, I don't think it's I think there's a difference culturally in white and having a white parent and having a black parent, but this clip has shown me, you know, what are they really teaching? Like what are they teaching their children? I can't see a black mother teaching it's okay to paint nails. But see, this is where the black father comes in. You know, when I taught school last year, you know, and everything, it's some things that a black father would not allow. You know, the mother may, but the father is not going to let his son put no dye in his hair and be dyeing it all these colors and frosting it on the tips and all this old stuff. I just can't see a man doing it. But a white parent, you know, at the bottom line to all this is, the conclusion to all this is, even if you do have a white parent, the end result is, I mean, for the child to be culturally white, you got to convince law enforcement, the judicial system, and all this to consider him as white. If they don't, then you'll just be treated like a black person. And that's all I had to say. Go ahead.
Thomas in New York, thank you for your patience, sir.
Good evening, guys. Good evening to all callers. First, I wanted to say to the lady that spoke before Puff, the voice-to-skull technology has patented. The military has a technology that's a little older than that called voice of God technology. And when they used it during the Iraqi war, when they shot this beam toward the Iraqi soldiers, they dropped their guns and fell to their knees and started praying to Allah. Because the sound that came, they thought came from God. And they just went and shot them dudes up. But that's been patented. That's going to come with the 5G technology that they're putting everywhere. They got it in New York, all over the buildings, with the technology they have called beamforming. They'll be able to interact with people. Each person is an antenna, essentially, that they can connect to. And that voice-to-skull technology is coming with that. I think I am one of the people that said Barack Obama. I never spoke about Melissa Harris Perry. You would have to pull that one up. I don't know I didn't do that, but I know I've spoken bad about Barack Obama. And in my opinion, he's still the worst thing ever to happen to black people in my lifetime. And if you're like me, you're under the assumption that white's number one weapon against black people is deception, and their number two weapon against black people is to keep black people confused, because he left us in totally deceived us and left us confused for 8 years of doing nothing. Also, he's also considered the first gay president, and I think you just was talking about a little boy being allowed to paint his nails because he has a white parent, whatever, but all acceptable. I blame Obama and white people that put him in the position he was at. I don't get why black people join Greek fraternities. I don't even understand why they would have a song telling black people not to join their fraternity, because we shouldn't have ever been interested in joining their fraternities. I'm to the thing where white people don't want me to do something, I ain't doing it. If you don't want me to eat here, I'm not eating here. I don't want your coffee. I mean, the first time I ever heard the song, I'm not joining your fraternities. I don't want to be a part of that. That's just me. I think that we've been here too long not to start something of our own. We're still calling ourselves Greek. It's just ridiculous. Where do experts on racism, they're coming from the Rockefellers, Chicago University, birthplace of neoliberalism, and Duke, the Harvard of the South as it's known. And they seem to have mastered the art of recruiting black people to play their sports, but they don't have a lot of black students in their school. And these are the experts that was in one of the clips that they referred to. I just don't understand it. The NYPD, they have way more than 1,200 Ds and narcos, okay? That's a very short number. They have over 60,000 police. I mean, they got so many undercovers. They got them for everything. I think that's a real convoluted number. That's a very that number is very deceptive. Also, I would say 9 out of 10 times, those are the ones that's going to jump out on you, run your ID. The regular cops, they have their own specific duties, but these are the ones that have been granted the authority to go around and just do whatever they want to. The Starbucks in my area, 2 Starbucks in Harlem in my immediate vicinity, they've closed already for renovations. So it seems like they're not going to be affected by whatever closing they're doing for a day. And the only thing I see coming out of that is just going to make a lot of white people angry because they couldn't get their coffee that morning. But I found it interesting that a bunch of Starbucks in 2, I haven't gone all around Harlem, but 2 have already closed except for renovations, and they'll be open the day after this protest. I thought that was interesting. The clip about the white woman who made a joke and was confronted by her black coworker, Area 8 activity needs to stop. White parent or white spouse equals a black person with high levels of white validation disorder. They're not going to be able to ever probably get to those people. And it's very sad because that person still loves their mother. It's just one of those things. And the last thing, a car chases you down, people jump out, they damage your vehicle, they call the cops and say, hey, I thought they stole my radio, and no one gets arrested. I think that's just terrible. I would move too, and I would sue those people individually. One I skipped here, T.I., from what I understand, he's having serious financial issues right now. And usually when black people, I've noticed a trend, when black stars and athletes start publicly having these financial problems, then legal problems start to follow right behind them. Because my mother lived in a gated community before she moved. But either way, I've had times where I didn't have my ID or my key to open the gate. All you have to do is have them call the house. That's it. Either way, if you have an ID, you're supposed to be let in. If you don't have your key, I mean, it's other ways to go about it. And the fact that the cops actually arrested him just shows you that this is a system of racism and white supremacy. I'll mute my line.
Appreciate that, Thomas in New York. Other folks that we've not heard from at all, if you have a hand up, line should be open. Proceed.
May I be heard?
Greetings, Red in Nevada.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my call. Hello to everyone. Just wanted to start off with saying very right poorly. But the things about the clips, I always appreciate Thomas in New York's commentary as well. But the thing about the Greek organizations, I remember Dr. Curry, he briefly touched on that in one of the shows that he came onto the cows about, when he was talking about how he didn't want to be in a Greek organization, but his wife was maybe involved in one. But it kind of made me think, going back to that clip. And then it's like when they were describing it, it made me think about one of the words that it was one of the white guests who wrote some book. It might have been like the one who wrote the book about the drugging of all the different celebrities, how he kept using oligarchy. And that's exactly what it made me think about, like how they were saying, well, privilege and this, that, and the other, and how they keep blaming it on, oh, well, it's just these few white people. It's just these few powerful white people, how they're talking about, oh, well, this is only for the privileged, and to cut out, like, the poor white people from being able to, since they were allowed to enter in college prior to the Negroes and every other non-white. But they still wanted to differentiate themselves from that lower class of quote unquote whites. And then the professor, how this is in the professor Greg Germain, and how he was talking about, we can't really say, well, this is just a roast. A roast is, at some point in time, sometimes it might actually be to hurt the person. And then for him to basically say, we really didn't know, we didn't think that they were really being racist. But you cannot say what they were talking about. You cannot say what they were actually thinking about during that act. That could have just been their way of playing out their racism. So I just thought that, of course, that was an act of racism. And I hope that gives other people understanding that it's not just, the students, but it's also these racist teachers as well, if there are any students who go to that university who actually listen to what he said. Just the whole, they constantly keep coming up with the same inclusive place, especially when it comes to these schools. And I feel like the only inclusivity that applies to anything is making sure that they have at least their quota of racist white supremacists within these schools, whether it's the little white kids molesting female school teachers, you know, the racist white man, whatever. That's the only thing that they really want to make sure that really being included. I was really paying attention to words. And the last couple of things that I'll mention, when they had the clip about the plainclothes officers in New York, and they kept saying proactively, the plainclothes officers are supposed to proactively, or race soldiers are supposed to proactively stop crime. And when I think of proactive, like something pro and positive, and so it just kind of, I feel like that could have also been another act of, you know, racism. This isn't the only thing that they're quote unquote proactively doing is, you know, hurting hurting non-white people or black people, but that's only proactive if you want to continue the system of racism, white supremacy. The last thing was about the T.I. clip and how the racist white supremacist man, I don't know, Finn or Zen or whatever his name is, I cannot stand them. But there was a person that I was around who used to listen to them and just thought that they were, you know, really, I guess, quote, progressive. But he kept calling T.I.'s wife Tiny House. He said it before, like, okay, well, you call up to verify who they are, and then the house says this, the house says that. And it kind of made me think about, you know, in the book, just kind of, you know, depersonifying black people. You could have just said wife instead of saying the house twice. And there's a lot of gated communities within, you know, Southern Nevada. So it's not really all that difficult. There's even gated communities that, you know, are just primarily black people, not necessarily wealthy black people, but just, you know, working class black people. So it's really not that difficult. Somebody will make a call. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you. And also last thing, if anyone's new to the show, just to reiterate, minimize contact to minimize conflict. That's definitely my thing that I kept thinking about today. Thank you. I'll mute my line.
Right on. Appreciate that, Red in Nevada. I did want to get in just to say quickly, if people heard the clip where the young black student, she was on the crew team and she was terrorized by her, I guess, white competitors. These were white kids, race soldiers that were terrorizing her. She said that they called her nigger and they called her Rosa Parks. That pattern recognition, right? Like just calling a black person Rosa Parks, calling a black female specifically Rosa Parks, that apparently is a racial slur now. That's at least the third or fourth time that I've heard a black person being terrorized and the white people just, the race soldiers just started calling them Rosa Parks and, you know, went to their violent, hostile act. Like, wow, I thought that was significant that Rosa Parks has become a racial slur alongside nigger, spear chucker, Rosa Parks. Other folks that we've not heard from at all, did you have commentary? Did we nab everybody? Missed everybody? Or did we miss anyone?
Can I be heard?
Greetings, retired firefighter.
Greetings, everyone. I would just say, I don't know if anybody mentioned it, but I think it was 92 years ago to this date, May 19th, 1925, was the day that Malcolm X, El-Haj Malik Shabazz, was born. So that makes this day significant in itself because he, of his understanding to work against the global system of racism, white supremacy. His entire life, from what we have studied, was meshed into the effects of the global system of racist white supremacy, as a child losing his father to murder, and in turn by white people, and in turn the family structure that he came up in deteriorated to the point to whereas it caused enough strife in the house that eventually the children were, him and his brothers and sisters were passed out into foster care. And in turn, now he had full contact with white people in the most atrocious and negative ways. We're talking about in the 1930s. And to whereas he was mentally affected in a racist way in grade school by stating that he could not be a lawyer. You shouldn't be thinking about a lawyer. And in turn, he deteriorated to a point to whereas he himself admitted that he embarked into criminal activity for a point in time. And in turn, which is a grand plan by the global system of racist white supremacy, the path that he went through was put into greater confinement. But at the same time, something constructive came out of that environment. He made the most out of that environment in a constructive way. And in turn, he came to become interested in studying and learning best as he could on how to figure out a way to come up with an answer to the global system of racist white supremacy. Unfortunately, in that path, as we all know, under the global system of racist white supremacy, its main weapon is deceit. And the effect that it has on victims is confusion. Within that environment of confusion, he ultimately was murdered at a relatively young age, reportedly based on witnesses by non-white people. But nevertheless, during his short period of time on Earth, 39 years to be exact, he certainly had shown a great example. There are others, but this is his day. A great example on in means of self-respect, in means of study, in means of not being tardy to, if he said he was going to be somewhere at 6:00 p.m., he would be arriving through the door at 5:59 and 59 seconds. And so it certainly is something that if you didn't know about it, should give some sort of attention to, if not briefly. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Ashe, El Haj Malik Shabazz, who had a great appreciation for the importance of black journalists. Other folks that we have not heard from at all, if you have commentary to share, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Caller in Florida.
Thank you very much, sir. Greetings to Gus, the host, the listeners and callers. I took a few notes because I know, like, when I listen to the audio segment, it's as you said before, there's so many things that come through. Like, it was some terms, like phrases that was used. Like, I don't know if anybody noticed it was a term. I think it was when it was a black male speaking about how white people call the police on black people, and I think the term personal racism valet was used. I don't know if that's referring to, like, when you drive somewhere and you need someone to park your car. Maybe that's the term they use, like valet. like I don't know what that even means either. Like they didn't define that one. And like another term that was used, I think it was in that same segment, and that might have been a black male, but he was saying, well, I can understand where if someone did call the police is if a white person looked at a non-white person, a person of color, I think, and they snarled, and they snarled at him. Now, like that term is implying that they are not human, like they are like some kind of animal, like that word snarl. And there was another where it was a comment about the black older lady who was arrested, and I think it was the same person, and he was saying, well, how would she be a threat? She wouldn't be a threat unless she was a ninja. Okay, like all of these phrases are used, but like there was another one too where like where they were talking about the fraternity at Syracuse and the term roasted. Like I know that term has been around too, roasted. Like that could be another word to add to like maybe the word gotta just to be mindful of, like the darkening of something or something's being cooked, and they're using that to be a synonym for when someone's being, I guess, teased or criticized, like roasted. And one last thing was, it was a metaphor that was used by, I think that was the Melissa Harris Perry, I think that's what her name is. And it was a metaphor where, like when the mom said she was going to go back and approach the black person who challenged her, like, what do you know what it's like to be black? And she said, I said no. And then she said no, like one of those movies where a person is running to a car loaded with explosives. So I guess the black person is supposed to be a vehicle with C4 in it or something. And that's all I have to share right now, and thanks.
There were a lot of interesting metaphors used. Yeah, that one was quite significant in that clip. The person trying to stop somebody going with explosives. Also, I thought was a very important observation about the term roasted, darkening. It's like we're going to treat you like a nigger for the quote unquote roast as we heap scorn upon you. Great observation with that term use. Other folks that we have not heard from at all. If you have commentary, line should be open. Proceed. Did we nab everybody? Anybody we missed completely?
Gus, can I make another comment real quick?
Oh, let's hear it.
The Young Turks with the clip with T.I. Now, the chick, or the lady, the female Young Turk, she said that it's not racist, it's not white supremacy, no, it's gated communities. This is why I don't want that they do the same thing to me. And you talk about the worst of the worst, the Young Turks. I just wanted to point that out. It's not racism. It's gated community. This is why we shouldn't be living in gated communities, so you don't have to deal with racism. It's just ridiculous.
Obfuscate. I think they do a great job of pivoting away from white supremacy racism when these type of incidents happen. And just for added detail, I believe the security person, or not enforcement official, but whomever the individual was at the gate where the initial conflict started and then the enforcement officers were called, I believe that initial person was a black person. So I believe it was initially T.I. and another black person, and then the enforcement officials got called. Now, I don't know about the racial classification of the officers, but if that is accurate, still in a system of racism, white supremacy, it's very difficult or it's substantially more difficult for me to think of a black security guard, not a police officer, not an enforcement officer, calling the police on a white property owner because they forgot their key to the gated community. Like if they have ID, you've called, person at the residence verifies, oh yeah, this person lives here, you can let them in. It's difficult for me to see like how that would get to a police call if that had been a white person, particularly a white person like T.I., like a white entertainer, someone with a lot of money and or financial difficulties aside with some status. Like it's difficult for me to see in Georgia, if that had been a white person, enforcement officials being called and escalating to that level. Also, that report about the fertility rates, I know Dr. Welsing, Grandcester, she would have had a lot to say about that report coming out this week, 30-year low in fertility rates for the U.S. But what I thought was interesting, this was not included in the audio segment that I played at the beginning of the broadcast, but this was in the New York Times report on the fertility rates. They write, the country has had declines before. The longest period of continuous decline on record was from 1958 to 1968, according to Brady E. Hamilton, a statistician and demographer with the National Center for Health Statistics. The United States has been tracking the number of births and birth rates since about 1910. That is interesting. Now, you certainly have a lot of, different variables for that time period, what they call the Vietnam conflict, but for that period to be known as a decade where you had a substantial number of black people worldwide who were working against racism, white supremacy, for that to coincide with the period that had the longest continuous period of fertility rate decline, that is interesting, something to think about perhaps. Continuing, the most recent decline has been deepest for minorities, quote unquote. The fertility rate among Hispanic women dropped more than 27% between 2007 and 2016, the most recent year of data by race. The rate for whites has dropped about 4%, for blacks about 11%, and for Asians about 5%. I thought that was substantially significant because the group with the highest drop in fertility rates, black people, that is something we've been talking about with all the propaganda or reporting that's being done about black females and difficulties in childbirth and maternal death rates. But I thought that was extremely significant. I would have definitely asked Dr. Welsing about that, and I didn't see that get a lot of attention in this report. That was not the lead anytime that I read or heard anything relating to this report this week, that, oh wow, black people, African Americans, have the highest rates of drop, or the highest drop in fertility rates in the U.S. I didn't hear that. That was only in the New York Times report. With that, other folks have commentary. If we missed anybody, you should go ahead and speak now. 641-715-3640, the code 564-943#. Press *61 if you would like to participate. Did we miss anybody? Anybody have a hand up that we've not heard from at all?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? This is a black male engineer here. I wanted to comment on some things. On the topic of fertility issues, there's something that I've been researching. It's this thing called RH monkey, rhesus monkey blood, or the RH positive blood factor. And essentially, there exists an RH positive and RH negative. And it's been proven that whites are either RH positive or negative and blacks are the other. And that when these two bloodlines mix, that results in infertility. So often you will hear of a black male and a white female trying to have children, and you always hear of a difficulty, that the white female cannot carry the child or that they had to take drugs. Some good counter-racist investigating to do would be to ask an interracial couple if they've had issues with conceiving. And I can assure you that probably has something to do with the RH blood factor. And white women have to take drugs for that. From what I've seen, when they try to have children with black males, they typically have to take drugs for that. I wanted to comment that also that the earth is not flat. The earth is not flat. And lastly, I wanted to comment on the Protect and Serve Act. This was brought into legislation this week, and it serves to classify cops as the protected class. And what that means is, if you don't know, it serves to put cops in the same, it gives cops the same federal protections as LGBT, anti-sexuals, black people, quote unquote, women, and other minorities, marginalized groups. So essentially, you can be charged with a hate crime against a police officer. Has bipartisan support, has been backed by police unions, and it's been introduced to the House of Representatives by Republican Congressman John Rutherford. He's a former Jacksonville Sheriff's Office sheriff. One thing I've noticed is that the Duval County, Jacksonville area, very heavy in white supremacy. If we're talking about legislation, police, that whole structure of enforcement against blacks, Duval County, Jacksonville. I think at one point, Duval had the highest number of people on death row in the world. In the world. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous numbers, all black people. There was actually a foster home in the Jacksonville, Duval area that a number of black boys were actually kidnapped, taken, raped, and killed. Nothing happened in those cases. But definitely research the Protect and Serve Act. And I would just advise everyone to be very careful around police officers, because you can be charged with resisting arrest for simply whatever they say you did is resisting arrest. So these encounters are going to get very dangerous, to the point where any encounter with a police officer is a potential death sentence. And I would just advise you to avoid police at all costs. Thank you.
With the Florida schools, were you talking about the Dozier schools in Florida, or a different situation?
Excuse me? What did you say, Gus?
Were you talking about the Dozier school in Florida, where they were for years abusing, raping, killing even black children, or a different situation in Florida?
Oh, yes. That is exactly what I was referring to.
Oh, okay. Right on. Multiple programs in the archives where we talked about the Dozier School and the years of abuse, that terrorism against black boys down in Florida. Also, to Red and Nevada's point, I think when she was talking about the oligarchy, just the use of terms specifically when they were talking about white terrorism in Greek fraternities and sororities, that was John Potash, who was on the program. He's been on several times now. He wrote Drugs as Weapons Against Us. He was on the program at the end of 2017 using that terminology of the oligarchy and these small cartel of powerful whites who are causing the problems, not like the rest of us good whites, like we heard in the sound clip. Other folks, anybody that we missed completely have commentary that they want to share? Anybody that we've not heard from at all have a hand up? Grand. Soon we got everybody. If other folks had additional comments that they wanted to get in, or questions, feel free. If folks that are listening, if you have not spoken and think you have a question or comment, please do not wait till the last minute. Go ahead and get your hand up. And again, if folks that are interested in the shirts, the email is not to Gus. The email is to cowsshirts@gmail.com. C-O-W-S, all capital letters, shirts@gmail.com, and Trav will hook you up $25 for a shirt. We will be making the order at the end of the month, so you can contact him and work out all the logistics, and you'll still have a few weeks to get everything together if you would like a shirt. Did other folks who dialed in, other folks have commentary?
Can I be heard?
Let's see, we'll get
I'll wait.
Grand.
I'll wait.
Draftomania, go ahead.
Okay, Gus, as far as the whole the birth rate situation, I'm just saying that it's just population control. They're right on target. But what I wanted to talk about is another topic. Wanted to talk about a 13-year-old boy that was kidnapped coming off the school bus in Texas, Houston, Texas. Did you hear about that?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, well, there was a 13-year-old boy Monday afternoon turned into a horror story when he was allegedly kidnapped from a school bus. His name was Xavier Parker. Xavier Parker's mother, Michelle Lee, became worried when her son didn't return from school and contacted the police. The police found him, and he had a terrifying story for them. According to the sixth grade account, five teenage boys approached him after he exited his school bus in a Houston, Texas neighborhood. Parker says the teen then forced him into a vehicle. A witness, her name is Kamisha Carmucci, I can't really pronounce her last name, later spotted the boy racing up a street with no shoes and a torn shirt. Carmucci immediately called the police. ABC 13 reporter Erickson tweeted details about this case. So you might want to look into this. This little boy, 13-year-old, he was kidnapped. Race soldiers kidnapped him getting off the school bus. In Texas, and he was terrified. He was taken to some type of shack or something like that, and he managed to escape. He managed to get away from the race soldiers. So I mean, it's been all over the news. I'm kind of, I just wanted to bring it up because you didn't have it in your clips. So I thought that maybe you didn't hear about it.
I'm looking at it. I think right now I'm looking at the correct clip, but thank you for sharing. I'll share with listeners. It's the system of racism, white supremacy. This sort of thing is happening on a constant basis worldwide. Red in Nevada, thank you for your patience.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to share again. I actually just had a question about one of the clips. I know that the whole birth rate thing was brought up again, but I'm wondering, how are they counting the non-white children of these racist white women, and even, I guess, maybe even some racist white men, because it seems like, I know that it might have even been like on workplace racism, or even on a different show where somebody was saying that sometimes it might even been Thomas in New York, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but where sometimes the white women's children, the non-white children, are classified as white, and then sometimes they're classified not as white. But I know that really doesn't, I guess, maybe make complete sense, or maybe doesn't completely correlate with the clip. But just wondering if they're counting what the birth rate is. I'm wondering if they're also counting what the racial classification of the children are. And that's all I wanted to add. Thank you, and I'll mute my line.
Good question. Racial classifications can cause a lot of confusion for non-white people in the system of white supremacy. And I think we talked about that before in terms of how people get classified for those when they go to do those type of statistical counts. The census, I think we talked about it in that context as well. Did other folks have commentary that they wanted to share?
Hey, could I be heard again?
Yes, sir. Thomas in New York.
Yes. In the hospital, if a white woman comes in, she's having a black baby, on the permanent record, that baby is classified as the race of the mother when she comes into the hospital. That's now generally on the first on the birth certificate it might be listed as black, but on the birth record it'll be white. That's how whatever your mother is, that's what you are. As far as how they do the classification. As far as the kids missing, this young boy who broke away and escaped, they have something called the dark web. And it's an internet that you have to have certain equipment, very expensive routers and things to access, onion routers and things like that. And it only works off cryptocurrency, usually Bitcoin. And you're able to be put in a room, and you can see a young kid get raped, you can see a woman get raped, someone get killed, someone get lynched in these rooms. You access them using the currency, and then as you're watching the act happening, let's just say they're raping someone, you could type in you want to see them cut that person's breast off, and you can put a monetary value to it, and if they agree to that amount, you'll send them that money, and they'll do it. It's like a lot of these bodies that kidnappings and bodies that are being found are somehow connected to the dark web, and that's why a lot of these things are not being solved, because they don't want to solve them. This brother from Vancouver, I had the privilege of speaking to him, and he said that in Canada, in the hospitals, when a woman comes in pregnant, and she has, I guess, she goes to the prenatal situation, they scan the baby. They have a way of taking some of the DNA from that baby, and they give them a list of percentages and things that could be wrong with that child based off of that scanning. So they might say, oh, your kid might have a 30% chance of having bad eyes. You might have a 56% chance of developing hypertension or have heart disease or whatever. And women are aborting their babies based off of this prenatal screening that they're doing. And that's essentially going to be coming here. But I never worked in that department in the hospital, but I wonder if they're doing that same thing here already. And this is what is causing a lot of this fertility problems that we're seeing, that people are trying to have the perfect baby, and let's try again, because this might not be the perfect baby.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Thomas in New York. Had not even considered that. Let's see, M. Hondisi, you should be with us, sir. Did you have commentary?
Yes, sir. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My phone had died earlier, or else I'd call in a little earlier. But yes. So one thing that I've said before is that white people are here illegally. They're in the country this country of America, they're here illegally. They're also in Africa illegally. In every part of the world, they're here illegally. And that's an important matter. And the other thing with the chemtrails, we should keep focusing on that, in my strong opinion. White people are doing the chemtrails. They're spraying chemtrails every single day without fail. Every single day. They're doing it because they have to do it. This isn't just something that they're testing out. They're doing this because they have to do it if they want to stay here as albinos or as albinos. And then also, as far as the royal family, white people are not the royal family. Maybe under this white supremacy system, yes, but from everything I've studied, the kings and queens of Europe were not white people. It got taken over at some point, and it looks like there's certain years you can kind of see that it looks like, okay, this is where the white people took over. And maybe I'm wrong, but the white people are not the kings and the queens. They're not the royal people. The royal people were sent out of Europe and sent to America. But anyway, white people are here illegally, and that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Appreciate that, M. Hundisi. If folks have any other comments they want to get in, 641-715-3640, the code 564-943#. press *61 if you would like to participate. There was or I won't say great, but there was, I thought, a super important report that came out this week. There was a high school in Pennsylvania, and they ended the lacrosse season. I think reminded some of the situation that happened at Duke a few years back, since that institution was mentioned earlier. But this high school, there was another incident where some racist man, racist woman, racist child, white kids were accused of, I think they had called a black lacrosse player, called him a nigger during the lacrosse game. Before I forget, the incident that I did play in the sound clips, because I didn't play this in the sound clips, the incident that I did play in the sound clips where they were abusing, the white students were abusing the black student, and the child's mother was there, and she said that she went to try to protect her child, and she said that one of the white kids came up to her and he said, "Well, I'm sorry, and I hope this doesn't get back to my coach." Now, the way that she said it, I wasn't sure if the little racist child, I wasn't sure if he meant, "I hope that me apologizing to you doesn't get back to my coach," or if he meant, "I hope that, me calling your child a nigger doesn't get back to my coach." I wasn't sure. From the way that she said it, I would just get clarification on that. Anyway, as I was saying, the clip that I did not play in Pennsylvania, the lacrosse team, same type of thing. Racist children called a black student, called a black player a nigger. Now, this incident got reported. The offending team, their coach, went to his players to try to figure out, let's investigate what happened. Which one of you called the child a nigger? What have we been talking about the past week? Who has the strongest no-snitch policy in the universe? Are these white children ignorant about racism? They don't say a word. They got their mafia training already. They do not snitch. No one sells out anyone. They don't identify the perpetrator at all. Nobody says a word. So hey, if you all don't tell us who did it, we're going to end the whole season. Insert crickets. They ended the whole season. Now, after that, these students had the audacity, race soldiers in training, or they're already well trained. These little white kids had the audacity to say, "You know what? We are victims of racism. We are going to mount a protest that they're only doing this to us because we are white. They wouldn't be doing this," and all of this. And then it got canceled. And I'm hoping that we can have a whole program, because I think this incident is so important for so many reasons. I posted it in the C.O.W.S group on Facebook. I posted it on my page. But these are high school students. I mean, we're talking at the oldest 17, 16 years old. And that's like PhD sophistication in understanding of white supremacy racism. I already know. No, I'm not going to point out, "Oh yeah, Johnny called them a nigger." No, absolutely not. Like, you do not, under any circumstances, are you supposed to point out, tell on another white for practicing white supremacy. That is not supposed to happen. And these brilliant illustration, they sacrificed their whole lacrosse. And this was one of those schools that's really, really good at lacrosse. Like, they're supposed to be one of the possible champions to win their region or what have you. So this was a big deal that their whole season has now been scrapped because of an incident of white supremacy. Whites are the masters at no snitching. Context of white supremacy. Did any other folks have commentary that they wanted to share?
May I be heard?
Red in Nevada.
Great, thank you. I have been, not adding some stuff about Nevada, but one of the things I want to add is that this weekend, whites, mainly whites, they're having this. It's called an EDC, an Electronic Daisy Carnival. Basically, where a bunch of whites go around, do drugs, and look at lights. The most retarded thing. I'm sorry, maybe that's name calling. I'm sorry. It just doesn't make any sense. But if you're white, you have that type of time. Well, there was an article in the Las Vegas Review Journal where they said to yesterday was actually the first day of that festival. It's a weekend long festival, and there were 33 arrests, 27 of which were of narcotics. And of course, they didn't say anyone was shot or anything like that. But they also said last year they had included the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. They would include like how many calls to 911 about like drug overdoses or whatever. They would include that in a daily report. But when they came out with the article said, I thought it was very funny, and it definitely, at least to me, very telling. In the article, it says, Metro this year did not include the number of medical calls placed at EDC in its daily report. The reasons for the omission was not immediately clear. And I guess this was today when this article came out. But I thought that was interesting because, you know, if the United States is at the height of the opioid epidemic, they don't want white parents to feel uncomfortable with sending their children to waste money to go to Las Vegas to look at lights and dance. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you for allowing me to share again.
Indeed, red in Nevada. That is, wow. System of racism, white supremacy. To have that in the middle of Nevada with legal prostitution, legal weed, gambling run amok, and now we're going to go look at lights. Woo! Ivy, if you have commentary, you should be with us. I hope there were no tech difficulties today.
There was not. Greetings, Gus, and greetings to all the callers on the line. I have your quote that I was trying to think of last time, and it was from the interview with the author of Hitler's African Victims. So it was I believe he is German. And what you said to him was you were talking about how in order to justify having these black people or these Africans in the Holocaust, that they would demonize them first. That was a lot of emphasis on that particular program. And what you said was that what they wanted to do is they wanted to demonize the darker Africans even more so, and they wanted to have a distinction between the lighter Africans and the darker ones, I guess, to say that the darker ones were more savage, and the ones that were lighter were actually the ones that were in the north, and the ones that were darker, you didn't mention, I guess, where they were located in Germany, because you said that this happened around, this was in this time period. So first I want to ask, do you remember that?
Which part of it? Like that sentence specifically?
Just saying that they wanted to make a distinction between they wanted to demonize the darker Africans more so than the lighter ones who were in the north.
Oh, okay. No, I do not remember saying that specifically. That's from 8 years ago. So no, I don't remember saying that specifically, but I'm sure I said it. It sounds reasonable. No dispute at all, but I'm just being truthful. No, I do not remember saying that specifically.
I kind of figured that might be the case because it was a long time ago, and the only reason why I asked is because I wanted to know if that was always the case. Like, has there always been lighter Africans, or did we get this way, or did all of us who are lighter now, because it's not that many dark black people in America, so-called America, did we all mostly get this way from slavery, or was there always black people from Africa that were lighter and then some darker? And I wanted to know if you knew that.
I do not. I do not have training in genetics and what have you to know that answer. So no, I do not know.
Okay. And so the other things that I wanted to mention were, I hate racists. I'm telling you, oh my God, like I hate them. And so like the racists, I ain't gonna even say ABC. No, the racists who work at ABC. I'm listening to, is it Draptomania? Is that how you say her name?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I did not want to say it wrong. When she mentioned the article from ABC, because I ran across. Let me hold on. I saw that article as well, and they're going to say that the child was allegedly kidnapped. Okay, well, if he's allegedly kidnapped, then these people in Texas were allegedly shot. Get all the way out of here with he was allegedly kidnapped. No, he was kidnapped. Another thing, Gus, you mentioned that the clip about the little white race soldier children are afraid of black children and this nonsense. Man, that homosexual, I think he was a preacher or something, and you had him as a guest on the program a while back. I can't remember his name. He said that okay, it may be him. What he said was that he called his teacher by her first name. You remember that?
Oh, that was a different white gay person. I'm sorry. Jim Grimsley, How I Shed My Skin. He was on at the beginning of 2016. Yes, I do remember. And I do remember that incident specifically. That's much forward, 2016. I remember that. He said he had a black teacher, and he said he called her by her first name. He did it deliberately. I think he mentioned a few other nasty things that he did to the black teacher. But yes, I remember that specifically.
Right. So again, get out of here with white children are afraid of black children. They're not afraid of black adults. If you really want to, they're not afraid of black adults. They're not afraid of black people. Let me stop screaming. The last thing I wanted to mention is that this so-called royal wedding, and shout out to Imhan Disi, especially when he told that race soldier, Griswold or whatever her name was, are you leaving? But anyway, so I think that they had this wedding, this so-called royal wedding. These people, they're not royal, they're terrorists. That's what they are. That they had it on Malcolm X's birthday, I think on purpose to, I hope I'm not using a metaphor by saying overshadow the fact that it's his birthday, so that everybody will be talking about this wedding, and they are, rather than his birthday. And so instead of celebrating him, they're celebrating these race soldiers. And in my view, they're both white. I don't care if her mother is black. She don't look white. She don't look black to me. She look white. And she married a race soldier, and that's really tragic. And that is not something to celebrate at all. What we need to be talking about is, Malcolm X. And so I think that was just strategic on their part, so people will be talking about that instead of Malcolm X's birthday. And that's all I had. Thanks, Gus. Thanks, everyone. I'll meet my line.
Context of White Supremacy. Appreciate that, Ivy. Other folks have commentary that they wanted to get in before we wrap. We have less than 20 minutes left in the broadcast. If you have any other questions, comments that you need to share before we conclude, feel free.
Appreciate you, Gus. Need my line.
Oh, I got my update on the housing situation. They said, all right, you can expect to be back at the earliest in August, maybe October. I heard that, and I went directly to bed, and then I got up and went to yoga. Other folks have commentary that they wanted to share.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Hey, how's it going? I wanted to comment on something that I believe Ivy said in regards to skin color in America. From my readings and what I've seen, there are a number of people in Africa of lighter skin. I wouldn't necessarily call them a majority at all, but it does happen. And I pretty much read that the gene responsible for skin color expresses a wide variation amongst Africans, and it's native to Africans. So you could potentially have a family in which there are 5 children and one child is significantly lighter. I know there was a Ghanaian couple in Britain, and they had a child, but the child came out albino, I guess. But when the child came out, the daughter, she had blonde hair and pale white skin. And it looked like a white baby, but, in some ways. But it still had, like, the nose of the family. But two black people can produce a white person, technically, just because Black people, Africans created all the other races. So it's possible for various skin colors to vary. I mean, for skin color to vary in families, but I think also due to enslaved African race in the Americas and white European genetics being injected into certain Black people, that could also be a factor, but it's not outside the realm of what goes on the continent. Thank you.
Appreciate that input. If we have other folks who had commentary that they wanted to share, man, I cannot believe there were a lot of things. It wasn't just the kidnapping, and I try to say that on a regular basis. Obviously, there's so many things that happen in the system of white supremacy. I mean, I am sharing a very minute fraction, and that's probably an overstatement of the different events and things that took place worldwide in the universe. But the Cannes Film Festival, that did get a lot of attention. Spike Lee's film that's supposed to be about, based on the true, what they call a quote unquote true story, or where a Black person, the word or terminology that is frequently invoked is infiltrated the Klan, and that film got a lot of attention at Cannes this week, and people saying, wow, this is one of the best films Spike Lee's done in years since Do the Right Thing, or Malcolm X, speaking of his birthday. Did anybody see any of the information about that?
I believe I did see like a trailer on it, I believe, but not like in its entirety. But I have heard briefly about the movie. Is it already released, or is it going to be like a theatrical release on it, or is it gonna? I don't know how is it going to be released.
I'm sure it's not released yet. I'm not sure if this is going to be like a major theater release, or if this is going to be a Netflix type thing, or what the distribution is going to be. I'm not certain. I didn't even get to see the trailer. I just kept reading about it and hearing about it, and I thought I had a report that I was going to share on that as well. I think I may have and just neglected to can't play everything. But yeah, I did see that got a lot of attention this week. Spike Lee doing my general view is that his better work has been when he is dealing with racism, white supremacy, like Malcolm X, Do the Right Thing, When the Levees Broke, Bamboozled. Generally, he does quality work when he talks about white supremacy, racism. Four Little Girls. Did we miss anybody?
I want to.
Let's see.
Well, just real quick.
Proceed.
Oh, thank you very much, Gus. Like that reminds me, like when I was this got something to do with racism, but this was like 2010, like before I started doing the research on racism. I did like a documentary on Spike Lee movies, and I had a class full of white classmates, and like that scene from Do the Right Thing with the bugging out. He brought the giant stereo or the boombox. Like I played that scene, like I had that scene, and it like all the white people was just like, if I'm not going to use a metaphor, but they definitely were paying attention, definitely. And I didn't have no problem showing that, like on my like I had to make a video like on his movies. And like that reminded me of that, and I was getting like comments, like really compliments by some of the white people, from that scene, playing the fight, the power in the background. So yeah, I wanted to share that real quick, but I was way more confused at the time.
I'm sure you would have a very different presentation given what you have learned since 2010, like all of us still learning. I recognize the late Bill Nunn, who played Radio Raheem. He passed away in 2016 in quite a few Spike Lee films. Was that Thomas in New York that spoke up simultaneously?
Yes, sir. School Days, you did a great job dealing with the colorism inside of the black community, I think, in a metaphorical way. I think that Spike has overwhelmingly done great work, even though I saw him one day in New York City, and he was in a car, and I said, Spike Lee, put me in your next movie, and he rolled his window up. But either way, I make it a challenge for myself as part of my codification to challenge people that come with racist theory. And what I noticed is a lot of black people propagate racist theory in their understanding of the context of understanding who they are. And I just would like to ask people, who told you that you came from Africa? The word America means copper color races. So that's the definition of that word. Copper is brown. And the original blood type comes from this hemisphere. It doesn't come from Africa. They are generally A. O blood is the universal blood, and that's indigenous here. So the people that were here, the oldest animals, the oldest trees, the oldest everything is found on this landmass. The only people ever to tell you that the oldest things come from over there are the people who come from over there. They tell you that the bottom, you started as monkeys, you evolved into men, till you got to Kemet where you were sophisticated, and then Greece and everything else is above that, more sophisticated, going north. They took the Earth and split it in half with the equator to distinctly put that difference in here. So I just think that a lot of the sciences that we talk about, that science called out of Africa theory. That's the same science that has you coming here on the slave ship. That's the same science that comes from natural selection, survival of the fittest. All of those things come out of this science. And the most important thing that comes out of this science from Sir Francis Galton is eugenics. Good genes are white. Bad genes are below that equator. This is all, all the stuff that we base history and science off comes out of them supporting these theories. And I just wanted to add that.
Well, I think there was a question at the beginning of it in terms of who told you, and my response for those types of questions in terms of disseminating information or the ideas that are propagated on the planet currently. The people who are most to blame for all of that, the people who quote unquote told me directly or indirectly, even if it was a non-white person who actually may have verbalized the words, those ideas, would be racist man, racist woman, racist child, to answer the question, at least my answer. Then we have 10 minutes left. Again, we'll be here tomorrow. Global Sunday Talk on racism. First time this calendar year, as they say, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 noon Pacific. Again, for the t-shirts, do not email Gus T. Email C.O.W.S, C-O.W.S, all capital letters, shirts @gmail.com. Trav will definitely take care of you expeditiously. The shirts will be ordered at the end of the month. Just send him an email with whatever information or questions that you have. If you need, a size chart or what have you, I'm sure he will help you expeditiously and with a smile. Cows, shirts @gmail.com. Do not email Gus about the shirts. Any other folks have commentary? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to tell the engineer, thank you for your input as far as the different colors for Black people. I found your commentary very constructive and informative, so I just want to thank you. I'm in my line.
Appreciate that. You don't have to give us the detail if you are still hanging out, Red. Just what was the nature of, seemed like you had perhaps a difficult time minimizing conflict with other victims of white supremacy. You don't have to give us any of the details, but what was challenging about minimizing conflict with other victims?
I guess the challenge was just making sure I just kept thinking about Dr. Welsing and just making sure to think about, we're taught to, Black people are taught to be nonviolent, be non-confrontational with whites, and that was definitely a really bad issue. That's actually why my voice is hoarse. But that was the main thing. It was trying to make sure not to argue back and not to engage. So that was it. But definitely, I kept just thinking about the show, and that's what helped calm me down. Just minimizing contact, even if the person did not want to minimize that contact, which is something that we're taught. You're supposed to aggressively, right? And I just kept thinking back to, this is racist white supremacists. These are the things that they taught us to do, and not just to completely just blame it on the person in front of me, but this is something that we're all taught. No, you're supposed to aggressively attack a Black person, but not do that same thing with racists who are aggressively attacking you every day. So that was the reason why I was right poorly. But thank you for asking. I'll mute my line.
Self-care. Any type of, sounds like that could have been a traumatic situation. Take some time for self-care, healing, yoga class. I think you said you found a Black studio there, maybe. But self-care is super important, and great job exercising Black self-respect. I think apply that right there. That's something that I think is super important. The degree of your understanding of white supremacy, racism, in my view, is demonstrated in how you relate to, talk to other Black people, victims of white supremacy. I don't think you learn information about what racism, white supremacy is, how it works, to talk down to or I won't say it even, to be discourteous, rude to Black people. If anything, I think the more that you learn and understand white supremacy, racism, I think the more patience we should have with other Black people. I could be in error. Just update the incident with the Black mother who had her 17-year-old son in the vehicle, and they were terrorized. It was a clan or a gang of white supremacists violently attacked them and caused thousands of dollars of damage to their vehicle and threatened them. 2 of the whites have been arrested. That did happen. That report was from Wednesday, and they were arrested on Friday. It took 2 days. They could have, killed, harmed, who knows, in that time. But 2 of the race soldiers have been arrested from that incident. Any other folks have commentary they want to get in before we conclude?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
I know we're running low on time. I'm having a problem with a racial soldier that I only see actually once a year at a conference that a friend of mine always throws. And the thing about this race soldier is that she's very relentless. If she feels like she's being slighted, she will continue throughout the whole conference and it's like 1 to 3 hours long, to do things to irritate you or whatever, try to get back at you or try to retaliate. And she even actually has my address. She sent me a birthday card once. And the issue that I have is I could counter racism with her. And like when she says things to try to irritate me or whatever the case may be, if I feel like I'm being mistreated, I could just not say anything at all. If she comes up to me and tries to say something to me, I could just say I have something else to do, or I could say okay if there's not a question. But she still feels slighted by these things. And so my question is, should I just do whatever? Because like even if I don't speak first, she'll think something is wrong, and I feel like I have to speak to a race soldier first. I don't mind speaking, but I don't have to speak to you first. But again, she'll feel slighted. So my question is, should I, to keep the peace and because she's so relentless, just do whatever it is that she wants me to do, or should I just counter racism in a way that is not, that is not discourteous or whatever, but not needlessly letting her punk me? So the only reason why I would even consider just doing whatever she wants for that moment or for that hour or 3 hours or whatever it is because, again, she's so relentless. She doesn't stop. So, yeah, I just want to know what you thought about that. I hope that made sense.
It does. I think I think you've demonstrated a strong understanding of white supremacy, racism, and applying and making your own individual counter-racist code. That's what we should all be doing to become universal men, universal women. I think this is later on, right? You have like a week or so, or even more time maybe, to prepare for this event. Yes.
Yeah, because it just passed, and I had the experience with her, and I didn't really accommodate, everything. Some things, but I was thinking of accommodating in even less. I saw about how relentless she is, and so I don't really know.
Oh, I mean, if it's just like a weekend thing, like you see her annually at this conference, this is not like a person that you're going to be seeing 40 hours a week and what have you for months and months consecutively. I think just, you'll know when the time comes what you are willing to, what is going to be best for you at that time. I think if it's, hey, I don't feel like accommodating anything, you can just do your code, apply your counter-racist code. And if she gets upset and, is asking questions, what's going on? You're not talking to me, or, you're not trying to spend time with me. I'm sure you could even just come with, hey, I'm not feeling particularly well. I'm not doing any socializing this time around. Just, going to the different venues, trying to get information and just going through it. I'm just not feeling too well this time. You have to catch you later or whatever. I mean, you'll have time to think of a lot of different ways if you don't want to be bothered at all, or if you just want to minimize and say, hey, I'll curtail the activities, but I'll still try to make sure that she doesn't become too disruptive for the time that I'm here, where I'm having to battle with her and her making accusations and that sort of thing, so that I can also minimize that. But I'm also not going to just do whatever she wants. I'm going to minimize that as well. I think you'll know, what type of balance you'll want when the time comes, and just execute your code. I think that's what you've been doing consistently, demonstrating here and talking about in the workplace, and applying your code. Just apply your code as to what you want to do that day with your time and energy.
I find your commentary very helpful. Thank you so much, and thank you for saying that I've demonstrated just some sort of competency in trying to counter racism. You are largely to credit for that, this program. Thank you so much.
All still learning. With that, we will be here tomorrow. Global Sunday Talk on Racism returns 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 noon Pacific. We'll be looking forward to having our international audience back. Thanks to all of the folks who tuned in. I hope it was a constructive investment of your Saturday evening. If you have questions, comments, guest suggestions, gripes, drop an email untiljustice@gmail.com. Much obliged for everyone participating. When I heard the report on T.I., and I used to, I wish I had been more cordial because I used to bump into and see T.I. all the time. I lived in Atlanta, worked at the comedy club. He used to come all the time to the club. I wish I had been more cordial because I could have remained in contact. Hey, system of racism, white supremacy can do a lot to give you a better understanding of why that incident happened. But also, when I heard about that incident and the allegations were made about whether or not he was under the influence at the time of this incident, sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. Minister Malcolm X, today's birthday. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, many of the non-white people that we esteem, and many of the black people who dedicated their existence to trying to eradicate the system of white supremacy, they would strongly endorse sobriety, us doing as much as we can to take care of our brain computer and our overall health, so that we can solve this problem, so that we can think clearly and come up with concepts to bring about a permanent resolution to racist man, racist woman, racist child. Certainly, if we're going to be out and about, enjoying the great weather, you want to be buckled up and sober. As was stated earlier, let's do everything we can to minimize contact with race soldiers, badge or no. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other Black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of Black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another Black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.